I think that changes even further. We'll be getting into that. We're also going to be asking, is this a general election going to become a Brexit general election? Do you think the messages about the NHS, the schools, the police, is that all going to seep through and become the issues that people are going to vote on? Or are people basically going to vote for Remain parties or Leave parties? We're going to be asking you those questions. 0344 499 1000 is the number you need to get in touch with the show. You could tweet us here at Talk Radio. You can even text the word talk to 87222. And you can watch us online because we are being live streamed. If you go to our Twitter page at Talk Radio and our Facebook page and on YouTube, you can watch us. Also still to come after the 12 o'clock news, Femi Oluwole from Our Future, Our Choice will be here in the studio, and I'll be asking him, well, what's the point of a second vote when we've gone to a general election? And I guess we just leave it to the voters. If people want a second vote, they'll vote for parties that are offering that. If they don't, they'll vote for parties that are not offering that. So we might as well all pack up and go home. With me in the studio to help me go through the stories and make heads and tails out of what we are reading and hearing are Mike Indian, political editor at The Graduate Tendency. Welcome back to the show, Mike.
Good morning, Alexis.
And first-timer on Talk Politics, Olivia Utley, deputy editor at the Article. Olivia, welcome.
Hello.
Lovely to have you here.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Right, well, I guess let's kick off with it's change of programme, change of what we were going to talk about. But I suppose we're going to have to start with Farage. He's announced today, was an Andrew Marr, only about 10 minutes ago, that he is not going to stand. We were even chatting before coming on air, where is he going to stand? Is it going to be Thurrock? Is it going to be somewhere? You know, he did mention, even in an article that is in print today with Tim Shipman, he gave a big interview, which we'll talk a little bit about. But even in that article that's printed today, they said he was considering standing on a Labour Leave seat. He's not standing. Olivia, why? Is this a surprise, first of all?
Well, I think it is a surprise in a way, in that the Brexit Party is being so incredibly bold in deciding to go all out in sort of all-out war against Boris Johnson, you know, standing in every single seat, chuck out your deal or we're going to hammer you, sort of is the message. And yet, on this, Farage seems to be being quite a coward. I mean, yes, I guess he just doesn't want to lose another election, having stood however many times. I think I've lost count of how many times he stood for Parliament. And Seven, and never managed to get a seat. And it is getting a bit embarrassing for him. So I think the reason is that he's worried that he's going to lose. He's worried that the Tories are going to throw everything into whatever seat he contests. And of course, all of the established parties have a lot more presence on the ground than the Brexit Party. It's quite difficult to run elections when you just don't have those numbers. You don't have those databases all set up. It's a very new party. So it would be a challenge for Farage. But what I think is surprising is that, having been so bold, he's now doing something which isn't bold at all. And you'd think, once you've thrown all your chips in, you may as well keep going.
Mike, he said to Tim Shipman in that article that he had been offered a peerage twice in order to basically take the Brexit Party into a position where they're only going to be contesting about 20 seats. Basically, he's been offered a peerage twice for cooperation with the Conservatives. He also said, again, big sort of claims here, that Richard Tice had been offered a safe Conservative seat and an offer to stand as a Conservative in one of the Shire seats. And he says to Tim Shipman, I wasn't going to be bought out, you know, etc., etc. Now, it's very important to say, Tim Shipman also says in his article that a number 10 source, or a Conservative source, said all this was just gossip and nothing was substantiated, but they refused to deny any of Farage's claims. So you just never know. And you're going to have to take all this with a bucket load of salt. But, you know, look, Farage really surprised people on Friday by announcing the Brexit Party stance, which was, Boris Johnson, drop your deal, or face the Brexit Party standing against you in every single seat. And now, 2 days after, the leader of the Brexit Party refuses to stand in the general election. you've sort of lost the race before you've even begun, haven't you?
Well, it depends what the goal is. I mean, as I said before we came on air, the point is if they want to win MPs, then Nigel Farage standing would certainly give a bit of a fillip to their campaign. However, I think what this is really about is Nigel Farage knows if he enters the race, I think there's a potential for greater divisions within the Leave vote out there at the moment. And among, large numbers of that particular section of the electorate, Boris Johnson remains incredibly popular. And I think we have to look back a couple of weeks to when Nigel Farage criticised Boris Johnson following his new Brexit deal with the EU, and then had to swiftly row back on those comments. I think in those couple of weeks, Farage has been taking the temperature among his support base, and he's realised that large numbers of soft Conservative voters who may be drawn over by a harder Brexit stance of the Brexit Party still like Boris Johnson. And if Nigel Farage runs against Boris Johnson, even in another seat, even if not directly in Uxbridge and South Ruislip, that is going to present some division, and that can be exploited by the so-called Remain alliance.
But if that were the case, yeah, if I were Farage, that's exactly what I'd think. And yes, it's amazing how much Leave voters have coalesced around Boris Johnson's deal. But if he's worried about splitting the Leave vote, then why is he promising to stand in every single seat in the country? It's just bizarre.
I think it's a sense of trying to keep the Conservatives honest as well. Let's be honest, the Brexit Party was always going to stand in this general election. They have selected by far and away the most candidates at the moment of most political parties. They've put up candidates in most key target seats. Farage claims he has 500 candidates ready to go, and I think we can probably safely say that he can believe that claim. But they always were going to stand, because fundamentally, at the end of the day, Nigel Farage's brand is really about being an influence behind the scenes, not the man in the driving seat, I think.
Well, I don't want to let the Brexit Party and Nigel Farage take over too much of the show. But before we leave them, do either of you have an idea of why the Brexit Party are so opposed to Boris Johnson's deal? And I ask this having already interviewed 2 Brexit Party MEPs on this show and not quite understood. Maybe this is my fault. Maybe this is my failing. I'm not sharp enough to understand it. But I don't understand. Nigel Farage, in his article with Tim Shipman, says that it basically ties us in to an alignment with the EU workers' rights and all the alignment issues that you'd have for a free trade deal for the next 3 years. That's considering that we're not going to get it before the end of the 2020, the year of the 2020. So we'll have to ask for that 2-year extension in order to get that free trade agreement done. But again, I don't quite understand, because any sort of free trade agreement with the EU means that they will require a certain amount of alignment. And the less alignment you have, the more friction you have on your borders. That's kind of, I think everybody can accept that. So why, Olivia, do you understand why the Brexit Party is so upset about it?
Well, personally, I think it's a lot more to do with politics than policy.
Okay.
I think there are 2 reasons, really. I think one of them is that Boris Johnson, Dominic Cummings, number 10, don't take Nigel Farage that seriously. Dominic Cummings doesn't like Nigel Farage, doesn't want anything to do with him. Nigel Farage is desperate to remain relevant. If Brexit's done and dusted, then Nigel Farage's job is done and he has to quietly retire. And we all know from all the times that he's almost retired and then not, that Nigel Farage is not interested in retiring. He wants to be the person banging the drum for Brexit, and once Brexit's done, then he can't do that anymore. So he wants to stay relevant. This is his way of staying relevant. That's one reason. If he just goes in with Boris, then he's over, really. And the second reason is that he just... Oh, God. I forgot the second reason. Never say 2 reasons. Always forget the second one.
Well, maybe Mike will have your...
Come back to me.
Maybe Mike will have your second reason.
I think Olivia's quite right that Farage wants to be the person banging the drum for Brexit. But I think more than anything else, you've got to look at what the opposition have defined themselves in relation to decide why the Brexit Party objects to the deal. And it's all about timing. The excuse that was being deployed by the Liberal Democrats, the SNP and Labour Party for holding back on an election as little as 7 days ago, remember, was that they wanted to rule out a so-called no deal at the end of the transition period, which would be at the end of next year in 2020. uncertainty. What Nigel Farage has wanted to do instead is to ensure that we left the EU sooner than that period with a Canada-style free trade agreement. So it's all about timing really now as well. Most of them have accepted that the withdrawal agreement in principle is actually necessary because it takes us out of the EU. What Nigel Farage wants to do is to try to be seen to be pushing Boris to try and agree a looser economic relationship as quickly as possible. Now, most people close to the process, and you can think about Sir Ivan Rogers here, who's the former UK ambassador to the EU, have said that it would take longer than the 12-month period to agree any sort of comprehensive free trade deal. But one thing that's been a consistent theme throughout most form of Brexit Party propaganda, and now the Conservative Party propaganda, has been this sense of optimism. We can get this done quickly, we can get this done sooner, and that's the vein that Nigel Farage is pressing ahead on.
Yeah, which has made me remember my
go on.
my second point, which is that there is still a proportion of the electorate who want no deal more than anything else, and who don't believe that anything apart from no deal is Brexit at all. They really want this pure Brexit. And Nigel Farage knows that there are some votes to be had there, and he's got an eye to the main chance. He's an opportunist, and he sees that possibility, and he wants to run with it.
But I also saw on your Twitter feed, Olivia, you made a very good point, I thought. On November 1st you did that, a couple of days ago.
I thought it was a good point as well.
Do you remember what point I'm about to say?
I do remember what you're going to say, yeah.
And you can find it at Olivia B. Utley. And I think you made a very, very astute point there that actually for people who are going to, who want to support Boris's deal, the fact that Nigel Farage is so against it makes those people feel better about supporting him, because you know, some people, as you said, some people are still very pro no deal and they will follow Nigel Farage everywhere. Although I suspect this morning they're feeling slightly lost. But there are some people who are leavers, who want to leave, but would never in a million years want to lend their vote to Nigel Farage or even be seen to be on the same side of the argument as Nigel Farage. And by Nigel Farage hating Boris Johnson's this deal, it's given that vote as sort of an acceptability.
Exactly. I've got a lot of sort of London metropolitan elite type friends.
But we're all the metropolitan elite in London. Come on.
I've made it.
Sort of young metropolitan types who voted Remain in the 2016 referendum, but sort of don't care absolutely passionately about staying in the EU. And a lot of them feel that, yes, they'd quite like to stay in because, yes, they see the economic arguments for staying in more than they see the economic arguments of leaving. But now the vote's been held, they understand, they feel that we have to leave because that's the way democracy works. And they sort of don't want to be conservatives because it's sort of not cool to be a young conservative. And they don't want to be sort of Brexity types, but now they sort of feel like, oh well, we're not Farages, we're not sort of no dealers, we're not hardcore Brexiteers. Boris's solution is just the pragmatic answer to Brexit, and I think that Farage has just pushed Boris's deal into the centre ground of Brexit in a way, which could be incredibly helpful for Boris.
I also have to ask. Later on last week, we had that extraordinary interview with the US President and Nigel Farage. I mean, setting aside the incredible levels of hypocrisy from Nigel Farage, and why do I say that? When Barack Obama dared to make a comment after being asked to do so by David Cameron in regards to the referendum, people lost their minds that the American president was even daring to comment on a democratic process that this country was going to undertake. Rightly or wrongly so, I'm not making a judgment of that. But Nigel Farage was one of the first to complain about Barack Obama voicing his opinion. And then in an interview with Donald Trump, for Donald Trump to turn around and say, I think Boris Johnson would make the greatest prime minister and you two should join forces and you'll be an unstoppable force. I mean, not only that, but also to say that Jeremy Corbyn is going to take you to very bad places. If that's not interfering with our politics, and it seemed that Nigel Farage didn't have a problem with that. So that's where I base my claims on hypocrisy. But what did you make of that intervention of Donald Trump? Do you think actually it helped Boris Johnson?
It would have helped him in... And one Firstly, in a domestic sense, I think, because it gave him Boris Johnson, a very firm rebuttal to an early Labour campaign claim that any UK-US free trade deal would have the NHS on the table. Now, a lot of people won't trust Donald Trump when he says that the NHS isn't, quote, up for sale, unquote.
Well, they won't trust him because he's also been quoted as saying last June that the NHS is on the table.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's classic Donald Trump. If you say two completely opposing things, if you say, I'm not interested in your NHS on one interview, 3 months later say, of course I'm interested in your NHS, you're basically giving people whichever answer they feel comfortable with.
I'm reminded of a basketball game that Barack Obama and David Cameron went to 4 or 5 years ago now in the run-up to the 2015 election that was seen as, by some in the UK media, as a sort of tacit endorsement of the White House of a Cameron premiership over Ed Miliband's. Now, US presidents are always going to have a preference, I think, for whichever British prime ministerial candidate they want to work with, but fundamentally we have a parliamentary system, not a presidential one. So Donald Trump's endorsement of Boris Johnson doesn't tally with the system as it works. But most importantly as well, because Trump is such a controversial figure over here, it's going to do as much harm as it would do good. However, the bottom line in this is that both Donald Trump and Nigel Farage chose to rubbish Boris Johnson's Brexit deal, and that's something that Downing Street would have felt was very unhelpful.
I think it was just pure mischief from Nigel Farage, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, as Mike says, it's damaging, obviously, that the US president is anti Boris Johnson's deal, and that's not going to sit well with Brexiteers who would kind of like a hard Brexit, but have been persuaded to support Boris's deal. But also, Labour has very much made it clear already at this stage of their campaign that their line of attack is going to be Boris Johnson and Donald Trump are one and the same. Everyone knows that Donald Trump is incredibly unpopular in this country. Poll after poll shows that Trump has just so little support in this country. And it's a very easy claim for Labour to make. They're both sort of blonde, they're both kind of populist, they're both, superficially they are quite similar. And Labour's thing is Boris is the British Trump, and by Trump coming on the air and saying yes, Boris Johnson's great, he'll make a wonderful prime minister, it just completely backs that up. So it's the endorsement from hell, really, and Nigel Farage knew that completely. It just turns Labour's sort of slightly ridiculous claim that Trump equals Boris into something which sounds plausible.
And of course, I think the attack on Jeremy Corbyn probably played very well for Jeremy Corbyn. As you said, Donald Trump has got record numbers of disapproval in this country. And actually, for the people who, let's face it, all elections you're fighting for the don't knows. The people who are nailed on, we don't have to worry about those people. You're fighting for the floating voters. And there are going to be a lot of floating voters who have very, very, intent dislike of Donald Trump. And for Donald Trump to come out and say, oh, Jeremy Corbyn's going to take you to bad places, but Boris Johnson's my favourite, that's going to suit Jeremy Corbyn more than it's going to suit Boris Johnson.
Yeah. I wonder if it might also help Boris sell his deal on the doorstep as well to a certain number of undecided voters, because don't forget, there was a certain caucus in the Tory party particularly who were reticent to the idea of any sort of looser relationship with the EU. Now, Boris's deal does embrace a vision of a looser economic relationship, but having Donald Trump come out and criticise it reminds those Conservatives and potentially some Labour voters as well that there is always a harder Brexit option and in their minds a worse option economically that they can opt for. Donald Trump's endorsement might actually help Boris sell his deal to a certain section of the electorate who might, as you say, Alexis, be floating voters.
Well, already Andrew has texted the show saying, Dear Alexis, listening to Boris grovelling this morning, I've reached the conclusion that Brexit is impossible, so I'll be voting Liberal Democrat. Thank you for your text message, Andrew. We want to hear your thoughts. 0344 499 1000 is the number you need. You could text us like Andrew did by texting the word text followed by your message to 87222. And of course, you can tweet us at Talk Radio. You can watch us being live streamed on our Facebook page and our Twitter page if you go to @TalkRadio, and of course on YouTube. Still to come after 12 o'clock, Femi Oluwole from Our Future, Our Choice is going to be here, and we're also going to be speaking to a few guests, so we want to hear your thoughts. 0344 499 1000, that's the number you need. We'll be straight back after this break.
This is Talk Radio. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio with The Times and The Sunday Times. Know your times.
Hey, it's me again, the TV. Since my family gave me Now TV, there's no more endlessly searching for something they want to watch, because now I don't do filler TV, just killer TV. If my family want movies, I've got blockbusters. Football? How about the Premier League? Or crime dramas? I've got loads. And they're never going to guess who did it. Now they can watch whatever they're in the mood for.
What's your TV got for you tonight? Now TV. 18 plus, month passes auto-renew, terms apply.
Picture a boy. He's in his teens. In a classroom. Distracted. What do you see? A lack of concentration? Or do you see what we see? A young man wondering how he can change the world. There are troops on peacekeeping missions that need that right now. Your army needs you. Find where you belong. Search Army Jobs.
Drivers, it's time to rise up and step up to a new Vauxhall SUV. With £4,000 guaranteed scrappage or part exchange value with 4.9% APR representative. Drivers, it's time to trade up. Search Vauxhall Trade Up or visit your local Vauxhall retailer now. T's and C's apply. Trade-in car must be registered in your name for at least 90 days. Conditional sale and personal contract purchase only. Subject to status 18 plus Vauxhall Finance. Other deposit contributions may be available if you don't have a trade-in vehicle. Ends 26th of November.
Right, listen up adults. The Sun is giving away over £600 worth of free books for schools when you collect tokens. Wow, that's a lot of money. To make sure they don't miss out, you need to pester your school to sign up by the 22nd of November. If you don't, you'll have to go on to the naughty step. Pick up the Sun for more info. T's and C's apply.
Talk Radio Traffic and Travel.
In Buckinghamshire on the M1 northbound between junction 14 for Milton Keynes and 15 for Northampton, we've got a broken down vehicle blocking lane 1. In the West Midlands on the M6 southbound, there's an overturned van and the lane closed on the exit slip at junction 6 for Spaghetti Junction. In Staffordshire on the M6 northbound between junction 14 for Stafford North and 15 for Stoke-on-Trent, 2 lanes are now closed for an accident. There are delays on the approach. And in Greater Manchester, the M61 southbound at junction 1, the Swinton interchange, the exit slip is still closed because of an overturned vehicle. I'm Michael Page.
Welcome back, Mr. Jones. How was your Touareg 48-hour test drive? Mr. Jones, I said, how was the test drive?
Fantastic, thank you.
What did you make of the Touareg's touchscreen Innovision cockpit?
Brilliant.
And the climate control massage seats?
Oh, marvellous.
How about the night vision camera?
Absolutely exceptional.
That's great. So, are you going to unlock the door?
No.
The Volkswagen Touareg 48-hour test drive. The hardest part will be giving it back.
Come on, Mr. Jones, open up.
Can't hear you.
Participating retailers only, subject to status, vehicle availability and retailer T&Cs. And 17th of December 2019.
Across the UK, online and on DAB Digital Radio. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Talk Politics with me, Alexis Conran, here on Talk Radio. Talk Radio is your election station. I am joined by my two guests this morning, Mike Indian and Olivia Utley. Now, we've talked about the Brexit Party. Let's leave them aside for a second. But we are still wanting to hear your thoughts, whether the Conservatives should do a deal with the Brexit Party. 0344 499 1000 is the number you need to let me know your thoughts. You could tweet us at Talk Radio. You could text the word talk, followed by your message to 87222. You can watch us on YouTube, on Facebook and on Twitter, and you can put your comments on there and we will read them out on the show. I've got some of yours here. One of the questions we put out earlier is, will 2019 be a Brexit-only election? Rhiannon on Facebook says it's all about Brexit. That's why an election has been called. Summer on Facebook says, I can't trust Nigel. He's advocating to split votes. Karen on Facebook says, Nigel for PM. I'm sorry, Karen, your dream's not going to come true. He's not standing. He's not standing. And if he was, your dream still wasn't going to come true, because there was no way that Nigel was going to become PM. The Mona 1 on Periscope says, vote Boris or else you get no Brexit. We're going to come to that. And Matthew on Facebook says, the trouble with British politics today is that people want to follow lies and misdemeanors, yet ignore honesty from a man of greater integrity and fairness. Equality, not inequality. JC 4PM. I think that's Jeremy Corbyn 4PM. There you go there. We'll talk about JC as well. Now, let's look at the Conservatives for a start. In the Sunday Times, it says that Boris is going to be worried by the Corbyn bounce. Also, what we've been hearing about the Brexit Party that's going to stand. They say they're going to stand on every seat against the Conservatives, although in both the articles that Farage has given and in this article, it is becoming clearer and clearer that even though they will stand candidates, they might not push those candidates in areas where Conservatives look to need to unify the Leave vote. So in a sense, Mike, are we going to see, we're not going to see a traditional sort of handshake cooperation between the Conservatives and the Brexit Party, but we will see it happen sort of unofficially.
I think what this whole election is going to be characterised by micro-targeted tactical voting and pacts between the parties. Look at the Brecon and Radnorshire by-election, look at how the smaller parties there came to an agreement. The Sunday Times story this morning that you alluded to says that the Liberal Democrats and other parties, smaller parties, could come, including the Greens and Blyth, could come to an agreement in up to 60 seats. Now, this isn't going to affect the election massively, but given that this is the fourth election in a decade, the third that we're predicting could return a hung parliament, that can make all the difference to the balance of power as to whether Boris gets an overall majority of even just a few seats.
And this is exactly the thing. Boris and the Conservatives need an overall majority to win this election, whereas Labour doesn't. And that's quite a big issue because Boris Johnson has, scuppered his chance of going into coalition with the DUP. I can't see the Lib Dems going into coalition with him. Obviously, none of the smaller, really quite left-wing parties are going to go into coalition with the Conservatives, whereas Labour has the door open to coalition with the Lib Dems, coalition with the SNP.
Well, you say that, but have you heard Joe Swinson talk about Jeremy Corbyn? I mean, that doesn't...
And also Chuka Umunna and Luciana Berger. I mean, how, after leaving the Labour Party because of anti-Semitism, could they go into government with? But I still think there would be some sort of a way, even if it involved Jeremy Corbyn standing down.
Crazy thought. If we come back to a hung parliament, which to all intents and purposes, well, who knows? But it's looking more likely, I think, than any of the big majorities. But if we come back to a hung parliament, could you think Joe Swinson be persuaded to do a deal with the Conservatives by forcing Boris Johnson to put his deal to a referendum?
There is precedent for this in terms of 2010.
Yeah.
I'm inclined to say not, because Joe Swinson has made a very firm statement that she will not work with either Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn. It's more likely to see a result of a Labour government, a minority Labour government, being in office supported by the Lib Dems and the SNP on the condition of a second independence referendum, or Jeremy Corbyn standing down, or both, given the fact that people are predicting Corbyn will actually win an overall majority of this election.
But are you saying that even if, let's say Jeremy Corbyn doesn't win a majority, but wins is the largest party, returned as the largest party, do you think another party can say, look, we'll give you our support to form a government only if your leader who won that election stands down? That's never going to happen. Is there precedent for that? Has that ever happened?
I think it depends if it's a convincing, I think it all depends on the seats. If the Lib Dems get a huge number of seats and Jeremy Corbyn is, the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn is just the largest party, it won't really feel like a win for Labour.
Sure.
I think there is a chance that Joe Swinson would then really hold the keys to number 10 and could kind of do whatever she likes, maybe including ousting Jeremy Corbyn. But I think, going back to what you're saying, I don't think that's inconceivable. And I think the Lib Dems are being quite careful not to rule that out. I mean, yes, she says she won't work with Conservatives under Boris Johnson. I mean, everyone has to say that before an election, otherwise their whole campaign is a bit silly. But she doesn't personally lay into Boris Johnson in the way that she personally lays into Jeremy Corbyn. So I think she's leaving the door a tiny bit open to the possibility of a coalition with the Conservatives or some sort of confidence and supply agreement on the proviso that Boris puts a referendum on
I think they're Lib Dems throwing things at their radio right now.
Just the
thought of the Liberal Democrats.
I said this to my Lib Dem friend. She was like, no.
Going back into coalition with the Conservatives.
I see one possibility for this, and this just happens to be maybe a vote-by-vote arrangement. If Boris happens to get the largest number of seats or a very slim majority, and the Lib Dems are able to amend the withdrawal agreement bill when it's brought back in any Queen's speech to include a second referendum. But I cannot see any sort of formal arrangement between the Lib Dems and the Tories. They're just too far apart on Brexit, and the Lib Dems have staked their entire identity this election on the antithesis of Boris's approach.
We are, as you said, we're talking about micro-targeting seats. There's a lot of seats that are hanging in the balance. We are already seeing a sort of a Remain alliance sort of, agreement happening. we're already seeing that the Isle of Wight, for example, we have Green candidate being promoted in the sense that the Liberal Democrats and Plaid Cymru and everybody else standing down, but not Labour, of course, not yet, in favour of the Green candidate. We're going to see the same at Brighton Pavilion with Caroline Lucas's seat. Broxtowe, Anna Soubry is going to fight uncontested. And I also think that Dominic Grieve is going to see some sort of coalition. He's standing as an independent in his former constituency. Is Labour going to join in any of these sort of alliance, standing down, letting a candidate have something free?
I'll be honest, no, because the opposition party has to be seen to have national reach. Now, tactically, it would make a great deal of sense because, as we all know, there are certain seats in which the Labour Party could never win. You know, deepest, darkest, rural Leicestershire is a good example of that, outside Duncan's seat of Melton and Rutland. But the Labour Party has to be seen to have national ambitions. Now, of course, it would make sense to them to, not to run paper candidates in Hampshire in the same way that the Tories running candidates, perhaps, in safe states like Tottenham, where I live at the moment. However, what this might mean is behind the scenes, we could see some more, particularly in... The trouble is Labour isn't going to benefit in the seats where it's more profound pro-Remain stance is going to benefit. So Cambridge, for example, the Lib Dems are going to go for Labour hard on that one because they know that the very strong pro-Remain message that the Lib Dems embody against Labour is going to give them that seat. So there is no incentive really for the other parties to draft Labour in because the whole stance is predicated on being further on Remain than Labour is at the moment.
What do Labour do then? So let's take Cambridge as an example. What do they do? Do they put up a candidate and just not put that much effort behind that candidate?
Well, Daniel Zeitner's very strong pro-second referendum candidate in Cambridge. The trouble is that a large numbers of Labour MPs increasing numbers have been pro-second referendum for a very long time now. Not many are pro-revoke, it has to be said, because they're aware of the sort of complex politics around that and the difficulty of getting it through the House. Even if there was a majority for a Labour government, because there's still about 20 to 30 MPs at least who would be quite strongly pro-leave. This is why Labour is going to struggle to come to some sort of arrangement here, because this is what Olivia was alluding to earlier with Jo Swinson going after Jeremy Corbyn more, because she knows that she can pick up more votes from the Labour side by criticising Jeremy Corbyn's seeming ambiguity over Brexit, even though he has moved on this issue in the last 12 to 15 months, than she does from going after Boris, because those voters for the Conservative Party already know they want to deliver Brexit, so she's going to be... Basically, the Lib Dems are trying to pick up Labour voters in this election.
Olivia, do you think the Conservatives do have something to worry about if we see lots of tactical voting and some sort of, non-official agreement, non-aggression pacts? I mean, it was quoted again in the Sunday Times that Tories are worried that they will lose the majority, they think, if Labour win Lib Dem seats or if we see tactical voting on a massive scale.
Well, I sort of feel that people always get very excited about tactical voting at the beginning of an election campaign, and when it comes down to it and people are in the ballot boxes, there's just so much tribalism still. I mean, I know people say that Brexit has broken down tribal party politics, but I don't really think it has. I think everyone talks about it and everyone says, oh yeah, I'm going to swap my vote with this person, blah, blah, blah. And then when they get to the ballot box, they can't help just voting for the party who they want to win the election. I mean, I tell myself I live in an incredibly safe Labour seat, and I tell myself that I'm going to vote tactically. I'm sure when I get to the ballot box, I won't. And I think there are probably quite a lot of people like me. So I think this might all be a bit of beginning of election campaign fluff in a way.
The other issue we've got to remember with this election that wasn't really a factor 2 years ago or 4 years ago is going to be the time of year and turnout, because a December election there's going to be between about 7 to 8 hours of daylight over the course of the day. The weather could be quite dark, quite cold. A lot of people may not feel like turning out and voting, and the worst case scenario for this election is if turnout is dramatically down on 2017, where it was just below 70%, which is still below that of the EU referendum. Both of those took place in spring and summer. People may feel turned off by, say, the complexities of the argument and voter fatigue, and also the time of year as well. A low turnout election for any party is going to really undermine its legitimacy, I feel.
I think that's completely true. And I think the other factor that we're not really bearing in mind about the December election, noticed this in the Times the other day, is it's going to be the drunk election. Everyone's Christmas parties.
Hang on, Olivia.
Christmas parties. But I mean, genuinely, I think that's a factor to bear in mind. You haven't got obviously it's cold and people won't really want to be turning out and it's near Christmas and blah, blah, blah. But also there's a different mood in the country in December. I mean, not necessarily that individual voters will actually be really drunk going into the ballot box, but there's just a different mood. We all know that there's a kind of revelrous atmosphere in Britain in December, and that's going to have a big effect on the result of the general election, I think.
Mike, somebody made the point of, with the fixed-term parliaments, does this mean that we are tied to December elections for forever now?
In theory, yes, but as the Fixed-Term Parliaments Act has been circumvented twice now in the last 4 years.
Also, I don't think it actually stipulates, 5 years precisely.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
So I think December elections going forward, but it's hard to imagine whoever gets in isn't going to repeal that piece of legislation.
So here's another question that I think has come up again this week, is that we are seeing record numbers, as always, when an election is announced, record numbers of people registering to vote, and also record numbers of the young vote who are registering. That, again, perhaps spells trouble for the Conservatives, although I think it's foolish to think that every young person doesn't vote Conservative and they automatically will vote for Labour. I think that's a very dim view of facts. But should we be wary of people registering to vote and people actually showing up to vote? And do we have any data about that?
I don't know the data off the top of my head. I know in the last election, the turnout there was this huge talk after the election that there'd been this youthquake for Labour, and it turned out to be basically a myth. There weren't huge amounts more young voters than there were previously. And you can see on social media at election time, so many young people saying, "Oh, I've registered to vote, I'm going to vote. And then when it comes down to it, the statistics show that they don't quite really actually turn out. So I don't think it is going to be a huge worry for the Conservatives. It wasn't last time, and everyone said it would be, and I don't think it will be this time.
I mean, I'm sorry, I've done a little bit of Googling here. Basically, the government data showed there'd been a huge spike in under 25 voter registration, 177,000 individual applications. But I think, again, we have to dispel this myth, as Olivia alluded to there, about the youthquake from 2017, when the data was actually analysed by the British Election Study, which is an excellent resource, I have to say. They found actually that it hadn't been large numbers of under 25s turning out to vote Labour, but largely disgruntled people in their sort of early to mid 30s who hadn't been able to buy a house when their parents had been able to, people who sort of, had to work during the last decade and, seen from their perspective, their economic and social positions perhaps declined somewhat as they perceived it under Conservative austerity and stagnating economy, and now Brexit. What is important, and this is probably my personal campaign for the election, is that if you really want to vote and are worried about the weather, get a postal vote in advance. You can always vote before the day. You'll probably know if this is going to be a Brexit election largely what you want the outcome to be, because most people have a pretty clearly defined view, I think, about whether or not they want to leave the EU. There's still about 1 in 3 that don't. The voter registration, however, it's always good to see more people register to vote in the run up to an election. The proof is in the pudding, as we've said, whether they actually turn out on polling day. And that's, I think, given the fact that unlike 2.5 years ago, this election is going to be the Brexit election because the Labour Party have a more clearly defined position. There's a deal on the table for the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats want us to stop it full stop. That feels like a Brexit election to me.
But it's a very good point that if you are worried about being able to make it, if you're worried about that your personal circumstances might change, then actually deciding to vote via postal vote guarantees that you will be able to, register your vote. Some of the messages here coming into us, keep them coming in. Remember, you can watch us live streamed at Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube. You can call 0344 499 1000, or you can tweet us at Talk Radio. On YouTube, Alison says, Boris is the one who will split the vote because he really wants to keep us chained to Brussels. Another one, this one's anonymous. It's Mark on Twitter. He says, locally on the ground, they should sort out who stands where. But as for Farage, boneheaded blackmail stunt, no, don't split the vote. So two completely contrasting views there. Dawn on Twitter, on the question of should the Tories do a deal with the Brexit Party, she says no, because Farage is obviously itching to go and front Trump's election campaign instead. Oh, that's a good point. The 2-hour drooling Trump interview, I think it was only half an hour, but it was stretched to 2 hours, marked the turning point in Farage's dumping of the Brexit Party long term. And also Paul on Twitter, he's on YouTube, I beg your pardon, says Corbyn will spend money quicker than it's printed. Interesting points there. I hate to be coming back to Nigel Farage, because I think he dominates too much of the politics, but he always keeps saying he wants to he would have moved to America and all those kind of things. So it could be that he is sort of deciding, right, I've done my bit. I'm going to be off to the States. We hear that the next step when Boris Johnson launches his campaign on Wednesday, the main focus is going to be attacking Labour's fiscal policies or their fiscal reputation. A little bit of irritation, I believe, from the Labour Party that Treasury figures and Treasury time and effort has been put into dismantling some of Labour's potential policies. I think that's a no-no, Mike, isn't it? During campaign time, you're not meant to use the government machine to fight the opposition.
Herder hasn't started yet on Wednesday, so they can still use it. Don't forget, George Osborne used it in the referendum campaign to create the so-called,
Project Fear
budget, as it were. The trouble, I think this is rich for the Conservatives, though, to be attacking Labour's fiscal policies when Boris has made numerous spending pledges, including ending the benefits-free estate, which will undoubtedly be welcome news to millions of people across the country. But don't forget, in the last 10 years, the Conservatives have gone from being the party that prided themselves on reducing the deficit in 5 years to being a party of arguably populist spenders as well. So for Boris Johnson to criticise admittedly, Labour still had more spending pledges and, the widely touted figure of nearly £200 billion for their nationalisation programme is a good example of this. For Boris Johnson to criticise the Labour Party for opening the spending tabs is a bit like the pot calling the kettle black.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, really. I worry that there are quite a lot of sort of free market, small state, traditional Conservatives who really aren't going to like Boris Johnson's manifesto, which seemed to involve quite a lot of throwing money at...
Well, there's so many giveaways. There's a raising of the 40p income tax to 80,000. That's going to cost him £8 billion.
Yeah.
There's really silly things, really, and I can say these things out loud now because we're not in Purda just yet, but silly things which you think you should have really thought that through. Instead of going out and saying we're going to rebuild 40 hospitals, where actually in reality it's only 6 and 34 are going to get a sort of a refurbishment in the next 10 years. And also in the next 10 years means it's not your gift to give, because you might not be in government in the next 10 years for those other 34 hospitals. I think it would play just as well for the Conservatives to say we're going to build 6 brand new hospitals. That's nice.
Yeah.
And you actually don't give your opponents, the opportunity to go, no, 40 is a lie, because then the whole thing gets branded as a lie. Just stick with the 6 that you can guarantee.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that it probably is a mistake for the Conservatives trying to play Labour at their own game. Jeremy Corbyn's Labour is always going to want to spend a lot of money. That's the way Jeremy Corbyn's Labour works, obviously. So Boris trying to do the same. It's just, if you feel like that, if you want a big state, then why wouldn't you vote Labour?
But also, do you think now that the Conservatives really can go there? They've had, Boris Johnson, Prime Minister, what can you associate with him? Well, you can associate 50 million quid spent on a garden bridge that never happened. Chris Grayling in government before, spending money on ferries that didn't exist. The amount of money that has been spent on the so-called no-deal preparations that now have to be binned, and then they're back on and they're back off again. I don't know. I think if I was the Conservatives, I'd steer well clear of making any sort of criticisms on wasting public money.
I think we've got to look at the fact that Philip Hammond isn't back inside the Conservative Party for this election as well. And he embodies the very values, I think. Because this man is by no means, left-wing. And the same with Dominic Grieve. Now, they are defined... This is the problem. The Conservative Party is falling into its old trap here of letting its position on Europe define it too much to a point of rigidity. Now, all the policies here that Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings and their team are unveiling, and I think the news this morning that Paul Stevenson from Vote Leave is going to be coming on board for the election campaign is very interesting too, because that's going to say a lot about messaging as well that was very effective in that campaign, albeit at times somewhat controversial. But none of it is really about the long term. And unfortunately, most elections can be defined, to some extent by a 5-year cycle, but everything feels here about the next year or so. And although at the moment I have a very good idea about what's going to happen in the first, say, year or so of a Boris Johnson premiership, the Tory manifesto is reportedly going to be less than 40 pages. That's a very slim prospectus to be elected. Now, the difference is between when Margaret Thatcher was elected in 1979 and she had a thin manifesto, she had a more clearly defined ideological background there. I'd argue Boris Johnson doesn't beyond simply delivering Brexit, and that should worry a lot of people if we're going into an election as well. What's it going to look like in 5 years' time? OK, we're going to take a quick break, and then after that I want to look into actually which parts of the Conservative Party are left, because there's quite a lot of people, quite a lot of bit of household names that are not going to be standing in the next general election. Remember, you can watch us live streamed on Twitter at Talk Radio, Facebook and YouTube. Get in touch with the show at Talk Radio. You can even call us 0344 499 1000 is the number you need. You can text the word talk followed by your message to 87222.
Countdown to the election on Talk Radio. The polls, the papers, the policies. Your election station. Talk Radio. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio with The Times and The Sunday Times. Know your times.
Are you immunosuppressed? Or do you have a chronic neurological disease, such as multiple sclerosis, cerebral palsy, motor neurone or Parkinson's disease? Flu, on top of health conditions like these, can easily develop into something very serious and land you in hospital. That's why the flu jab is free for you. You need it. So don't put it off. Contact your GP or pharmacist to get your free flu jab now. NHS. Help us help you stay well this winter.
She did it! Her first word. Go on, say it again for Mummy.
Nada. Mama.
Oh.
Savings.
Did you hear that?
Savings account.
Teaching your kids how to save may not be this easy, but you can get them learning good habits and skills from an early age, thanks to the range of children's savings accounts from Yorkshire Building Society. Just another example of real help with real life. Find out more at ybs.co.uk.
Philip Schofield here. Did you know WeBuyAnyCar.com can help settle any outstanding finance on your car? They just sort it all out for you. And did you know you can't hum whilst holding your nose? No, me neither. Not as useful as settling outstanding finance, but good to know. Take the hassle out of selling your car and enter your reg number now at WeBuyAnyCar.com.
Admin fee may apply. For more information, see WeBuyAnyCar.com/info.
Order! Point of order!
With analysis and opinion from the best connected journalists in Westminster, The Times and The Sunday Times can help you make sense of the political jungle. Visit thetimes.co.uk or pick up your copy today.
Talk Radio, traffic and travel.
On the M61 southbound in Greater Manchester, we've still got an overturned vehicle blocking the exit slip at junction 1 for the M60 at the Swinton interchange. In Staffordshire on the M6 northbound, the two outside lanes are closed because of an earlier accident between junction 14 for Stafford North and 15 for Stoke-on-Trent. It's causing delays. The West Midlands and the M6 southbound at junction 6 for Spaghetti Junction, we've got an overturned van blocking a lane on the exit slip to the A38M. And in Cornwall, Great Western Railway still have buses running between Newquay and Par for emergency repair work. I'm Michael Payne.
Welcome back, Mr. Jones. How was your Touareg 48-hour test drive? Mr. Jones, I said, how was the test drive?
Fantastic, thank you.
What did you make of the Touareg's touchscreen Innovision cockpit?
Brilliant.
And the climate control massage seats?
Oh, marvellous.
How about the night vision camera?
Absolutely exceptional.
That's great. So, are you going to unlock the door?
No.
The Volkswagen Touareg 48-hour test drive. The hardest part will be giving it back.
Come on, Mr. Jones, open up.
Can't hear you.
Participating retailers only, subject to status, vehicle availability and retailer T&Cs. And 17th of December 2019.
He's the righteous reporter who's got his finger on the pulse of UK politics.
They should be scrutinised more closely.
The Week with John Nicholson on Talk Radio. This afternoon from 4. Join the stout speaker with a triple lock manifesto to bring you the week's big stories from Westminster.
Journeying across the week's political landscape, debating all the pressing issues.
I'll be presiding over fast-paced political debate.
From budget cuts to Brexit, or ballots to backbenchers.
All from his heavily reinforced radio dispatch box.
Read my lips.
It's a 3-line whip to listen to The Week with John Nicholson.
Toying the party line this afternoon from 4
on Talk Radio. Across the UK, online and on DAB Digital Radio. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the show with me, Alexis Conran, here on Talk Radio. You're listening to Talk Politics with The Times. Be well informed. With me, I have Mike Indian and Olivia Utley. Remember, you can watch us being live streamed on Twitter, on Facebook, and on YouTube. I know so many of you are watching on YouTube that we are going to keep the live stream going for the rest of the show. So until 1 o'clock, you'll be able to see Femi Oluwole from Our Future, Our Choice, who's going to join me here at 12 o'clock. Keep your comments coming. We have a team that is shifting through them, and they put them up on my desk, and I will be reading them. And of course, get in touch with the show. 0344 499 1000 is the number you need, or you could tweet us here at Talk Radio. Karen on Facebook says, I know the young won't turn out because I have to drag mine to vote. Well, keep dragging them out there, Karen. Chris on Twitter says, do you not think most marginals would swing on whether or not they want Corbyn in office? Or more importantly, don't want Diane Abbott as Home Secretary? Having her in charge of national security is frightening, Chris. Yes, I think that you make a good point there, in the sense that I've always wondered, when people, you mentioned this earlier, Olivia, that people become quite tribal when they get in there, and we talked about tactical voting. And how much do you think people, when they go and they put their cross on the box, think about, what's my local MP done for me? Do I agree with what they say, how they voted? Or do they think to the final outcome, do I want Boris Johnson, Jeremy Corbyn, Joe Swinson in number 10?
Well, interestingly, I think this is going to be a big change from the 2017 general election, because I think we quite often forget that in 2017 it was just completely sort of conventional wisdom that Theresa May was going to win, and that there was no chance of Jeremy Corbyn gaining a majority. So I think a lot of people, and we do forget this, voted for their Labour MP. Quite a lot of Labour MPs were running on the grounds of, don't worry, Jeremy Corbyn won't be your Prime Minister, just vote for me as your local MP. And I think in 2017 people were voting for their local MP because they thought that Theresa May just had it in the bag. But I think this time round, when everything's so uncertain, everything's up for grabs, I think people will be voting for who they want to be Prime Minister.
Mike?
To me, all politics is local. And, for example, where I grew up in Nuneaton, the Marcus Jones, who has been the MP since 2010, has kept the seat, despite Labour's increasing share of the vote in 2017. Mainly because he's a good local MP. I think it counts for a lot. And I mentioned to you before we came on air, there's been a change in the rules this time round. Past elections have been defined by marginal seats with carefully targeted spending from the national campaigns and appearances by the party leaders, who are the real star power of the campaign. And obviously both the leaders in this campaign have their own kind of, sort of stardust to sprinkle on their seats. The new rules mean that those now have to count towards very tight local spending limits. And that also affects social media campaigns as well. So this puts more of the onus on local parties
on the
and local
MP.
Exactly. And that comes back to this election will be more local, I think, than ever before. Of course, Brexit's going to be one side of it as well, but there are so many other local issues as well. It's not for without reason that Liberal Democrats, always seem to be pointing to potholes on their social media account, but that's the kind of thing local people care about.
Lib Dems are very good at the local.
Very good.
Good at the potholes. Let's look at the Conservative Party before we go to the 11 o'clock news. There has been another resignation. Margot James, who had the whip restored, she was one of the 21 MPs who lost the whip by supporting the Benn Act to prevent no-deal Brexit from happening. She had the whip restored, but now she's gone. She was the MP for Stourbridge. She has a 7,000 majority. We have to address that. Look, I'm perfectly happy to agree with the amount of female MPs that have decided to step down is completely proportionate to the female MPs in Parliament. I think it's just about 30% of those standing down are female MPs, and 30% is the average female MPs in Parliament. But does it strike you as odd that, first of all, there's a lot of Conservative female MPs and also young MPs, MPs that have only been there, I've only won one election or maybe two elections. Justin Greening, you've got Nicky Morgan, you've got a lot of sort of big names, young people, and all of them citing some form of problems with personal life, directed to abuse. So two things there. One is, have we made politics a completely unattractive profession for anybody who wants to do something and help the country? And second of all, have the Tories can they still call themselves One Nation Tories?
On the first point, I think we have made politics very unattractive for young women to go into. I mean, there's just so much horrible abuse of politicians, and it seems to have been normalised and legitimised, and generally just abuse in the political area. I mean, I get so much abuse every time I go on telly. I would absolutely... I thought I wanted to be an MP once. Not sure if anyone would want me to be an MP, but I once thought I wanted to be an MP. I wouldn't do it, literally because of the abuse.
Really?
And I'm sure there are a lot of young women who feel exactly the same. And
important to say that there's quite a lot of men are getting abuse as well. I don't want to leave
definitely.
them out, but I think it's important.
I think there's something particularly sort of personal, and it's so much... I mean, I'm talking from a completely personal perspective here, but so much of the abuse I get is about like my looks in a way that I don't think men quite get exactly the same sort of abuse. And it's so... No, you have to be so thick-skinned to deal with it. And God, you see what politicians get from all sides of the political spectrum, like from Diane Abbott to Anna Soubry to Brexiteer female MPs. I mean, just so much horrible abuse. And I think that's really worrying. On the kind of One Nation thing, I'm not quite so convinced about that. I think One Nation is an incredibly loose term. It's just for people who consider themselves moderate to say, oh, I'm One Nation, and that makes me reasonable and moderate and a good person.
It is, but like you referenced some of your friends earlier and what they're thinking of doing, I have had, they're still my friends. I have friends who are swing voters. You know, they have voted for all parties at different stages of their lives. And I know for a fact that the few that have voted Conservative in the past now look at the Conservatives without Kenneth Clarke, without Dominic Grieve, without Rory Stewart, without... you know, Justin Greening, Nicky Morgan, people they could point to and go, actually, I can associate with those values. And they look at the people they recognise, because, of course, we don't know who is going to come in and fill those places. But the people that they do recognise are Mark Francois, Steve Baker, Peter Bone, William Cash, Sajid Javid, the front bench. And that is a very different-looking Conservative Party to the one that a swing voter could have thought, well, actually, I can lend my vote to the Conservatives because I agree with what they're saying at the moment. But now, like you made your point earlier, that people might find Boris Johnson's Brexit deal acceptable because Nigel Farage has distanced himself from it, and now it'd be acceptable. I think the reverse has happened for a vote from moderates and swing voters for the Conservatives. Now they think they're giving their vote to Mark Francois, and they're not comfortable with that.
Well, let's be honest, this election does mark the death of liberal conservatism here. This is the brand of Cameronism that brought them a modest degree of success in the middle part of the decade. Margot James leaving the party really, I think, underlines that fact. So does Nicky Morgan's departure. I think only Ed Vaizey can really be said as someone who represents the tradition that's still inside the party. And I think also what Olivia said there about the level of abuse that people get, true. It's very true, and we should all reflect on the fact that both, two other ministers in Boris's government, Mims Davis and Seema Kennedy, who were elected in 2015, not only having to go through their third election, they're shooting to stand down, but it would have been their third election, but also are leaving politics as well. This election campaign has got to have a cleaner, more coherent tone, a kinder tone than its past two predecessors.
Right, we're going to take the 11 o'clock news, but we still want to hear your thoughts. Remember, you can watch us live streamed on Twitter, Facebook and YouTube. 0344 499 1000 is the number you need to let us know your thoughts. And you could tweet us here at Talk Radio and text the word talk to 87222. It's the 11 o'clock news next.
Talk Radio. Contact Talk Radio. Call 0344 499 1000. Text Talk and your message to 87222. Texts cost 25 pence plus your standard network rate. Or you can tweet us at Talk Radio.
This is Talk Radio.
The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio. With the Times and the Sunday Times. Know your times.
Today, it's Crystal Palace v Leicester and Everton v Tottenham in a cracking double-header. And with no TV, you can watch both games live for a one-off payment of just $9.99. Hold on, they're checking with VAR.
That's confirmed, it's $9.99.
Unbelievable stuff. So, to only pay for the games that matter to you, grab a Now TV Sky Sports Day Pass. Search Now TV Sports. 18 plus, content streamed via internet, full terms apply.
It's hard to enjoy your daily yoga routine when your mind is on your next VAT return. But with QuickBooks, the new VAT Smart Scan technology checks for errors and reviews VAT codes for you. So your biggest struggle is touching your forehead with your ankle.
Search for QuickBooks. Perfect for making tax digital. QuickBooks. Backing you.
Book your seat this November for the chance to win some amazing football prizes with Hyundai. Go to football.hyundai.co.uk and register to test drive a Kona, Kona Hybrid, Tucson or Santa Fe from Hyundai's range of SUVs, and you could win an unforgettable football experience, including a VIP trip to Madrid to watch Atletico take on Villarreal and tickets to top Chelsea games. Book your seat. Find out more at football.hyundai.co.uk. 18 plus, terms apply.
How do I love thee? Let me say. You help me work, rest and play. Smart, stylish, chic and clever. I want to share our battery life together.
Your phone. At Tesco Mobile, you can lower your monthly bill with your Tesco Club Card vouchers worth double, so you can find the one you truly love. Visit us in store or search Tesco Mobile. Tesco Mobile. Every little helps.
Lower monthly prices by applying vouchers to initial upfront payment or monthly bills. Purchase required, subject to status, T's and C's apply.
On DAB, digital radio, online and on mobile.
This is Talk Radio. Across the UK, online and on DAB.
Talk Radio, on the hour news headlines.
Good morning, I'm Daryl Jackson. Labour's promising to spend £60 billion on better insulation and greener heating for homes. It says it'll fund the biggest housing improvement programme for decades if it wins next month's general election. Shadow Business Secretary Rebecca Long-Bailey says it'll be offered to every household in the UK.
We estimate that it would cut cases of asthma by 500,000 by 2030. It would eliminate fuel poverty by the mid-2020s, and every single household bill would go down.
The Conservatives have announced an end to the freeze on benefits. Meanwhile, Nigel Farage says he won't be standing in next month's general election. The Brexit Party leader had been expected to run to become an MP after 7 previous unsuccessful attempts. A man's died and 4 people are in hospital after a car crashed into a pub in Essex. It happened in Colchester just after midnight. Police are questioning a man on suspicion of murder. And a woman in her 60s has died after a tree fell on her car in strong winds in Dorset yesterday. The Met Office says winds of up to 80 miles an hour were recorded, with parts of Devon and Cornwall the hardest hit. On to the weather, a mix of rain, showers and sunny spells today. Most of the rain over eastern and northern Scotland.
Talk Radio Sports Update.
Liverpool boss Jurgen Klopp wasn't happy with his team's body language in the first half of their Premier League win at Aston Villa. He felt they looked like players but not warriors before coming from behind to grab a 2-1 victory. The top flight leaders remain 6 points clear. Nearest challengers Manchester City also had to come from behind as they beat Southampton by the same scoreline. Arsenal surrendered another lead as they drew 1-1 at home to Wolves, while Bournemouth beat Manchester United 1-0. Leicester boss Brendan Rodgers says it's no surprise to see Crystal Palace doing so well this season. The two sides meet in the Premier League this afternoon, with both heading into the weekend in the top 6.
Talk Radio. Across the UK, online and on DAB Digital Radio.
Talk Politics with Alexis Conran on Talk Radio. So I still don't know who that voice is. He sounds extremely bored. We must have a word. Welcome back to the show with me, Alexis Conran, here on Talk Radio. You're listening to Talk Politics. With me, I have Mike, Indian political editor at the Groucho Tendency, and Olivia Utley, deputy editor at The Article. And we have been talking about the stories this week, what's going to happen next week, of course. But, of course, we start with tomorrow, Mike, is the voting for the new speaker.
Yes, it is. And to a lot of people, a year ago I'd have said most people aren't going to care about this, but given how John Bercow sort of enjoyed a degree of viral fame with some of his, rulings and order, there's going to be quite an exhaustive process tomorrow. It's going to be last chance for many people to see Ken Clarke in a sort of leading role, because he, as the father of the House, oversees the election. There are 10 to 12 candidates standing to replace John Bercow as the Speaker. The overriding theme for most of their campaigns is MPs that choose the Speaker, but there's been a certain degree of media interest given the Speaker's prominence, and it could be another hung Parliament, has been that they will keep a lower media profile but try and keep the sort of empowered voice of the backbencher that John Bercow championed, particularly during the early part of his speakership.
Olivia, any surprises, do you think? Is it going to be Sir Lindsay Hoyle?
I hope and think it'll be Sir Lindsay Hoyle, who I think is very good and has shown that he can do the job over and over and over again. I never know, I suppose, but he had so many endorsements really early on. I think he will win.
Is there anybody else who has a slight? Is it Harriet Harman?
I think Harriet Harman is the biggest name in the race, and it would be foolish to rule her out. I think actually Olivia made a very good point before we came on air about Dame Eleanor Lang, who has the best voice of any of them. She's like, order. She's got a very deep, sort of almost baritone.
Very, very critical of John Bercow.
Very critical of John Bercow, which is probably the most critical apart from Charlotte Farr and Henry Bellingham, who are in the race too. But expect this speaker to be, at least at the beginning of their tenure, significantly lower in profile than John Bercow has been as well, because I would say most of them haven't got the comparable sense of ego that blighted the former speaker's tenure.
Okay. Now, we saw earlier this week the launch of the Brexit Party's campaign, but of course the Labour Party before that at Battersea Arts Centre, where Jeremy Corbyn stood up and he looked ready for his campaign. We know he's good as a good campaigner, and he looks raring and ready to go. And joining us on the line is James Frith, Labour MP for Bury North. Welcome to the show.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
Is Labour ready for an election in your view?
We're definitely ready for the election. I voted for the election. I'm fired up. We had a campaign launch last night. We've been door knocking this week. Our Labour support is good, and we're taking the fight here in Bury North, asking people to keep their faith in me after 2 years, my first 2 years, and campaigning for real change in the country at large.
What do you think your message is going to be? What differentiates you from the Conservatives? What's the strategy going to be?
Well, I think the opportunity for real change is the message at national level. But there is definitely the kind of air war and ground war, as is often referred to. And in Bury North, we are at least formally, a typical bellwether seat. We won in 2017, bucking the national trend, and we're asking people to stick with me this time because of the successes and victories we've had together in Bury, despite the Tory government. And when the Tories are asking for permission to govern again, appearing or attempting to appear to be different to that which has gone for the last decade of austerity and the mess they've made of Brexit, Bury folk will not be hoodwinked by such an offer. When they talk about Britain deserving better and Bury deserving better, it certainly does, and we certainly do, but it's not the Tories that will bring that betterment.
Now, James, you have a Leave constituency. It's from what I can see, it's about the national average about 53-46, it says here, of your Leave constituency. Yep. It was previously won by David Nuttall with a tiny majority in 2015. You've managed to turn your majority into about 4,000, roughly the right figure. Right. Are you worried at all of perhaps a Brexit Party challenge on your seat? They have said that they are going to target these Labour Leave seats. They're going to focus on that. I'm
not worried. A politician, you go into these things eyes wide open. There are always, whether you're voted in or not, there are always people that want you out and want to be in your place. That's sort of part of the deal, right? But as to the Leave vote, you're right. That is a fair summary of what's happened in Bury. The only addition to that is, of course, the referendum happened in 16, and then as somebody that was a known Remainer, I was voted in 2017, having campaigned in the seat for the general election in 15 and the referendum in 16, and then elected in 17. So what I'm not saying is that there is a big healing number on either side. There's no mass transfer of conviction from Leave to Remain or Remain to Leave. There is definitely a sense of we know more than we did. There is definitely a carry from Leave to Remain. There is definitely an appetite to have a final say. And what I've been saying is, look, Parliament is in deadlock. I voted for the election so that the people can give further instruction to Parliament. I have got an issue with Johnson's decision to ask a general question about a specific issue. A general election is everything from hospitals and schools and what the state of the roads are like, as well of course as Brexit. But what I sense on the doorstep, well, not just sense, what I hear on the doorstep, is that this goes well beyond Brexit. And so I'm making the case that we need the investment in schools, funding gap for our most vulnerable children with special educational needs and disabilities. I need to be re-elected to save Bury Football Club. You know, Bury Football Club's collapse has torn a social, economic, cultural hole out of Bury as a town, and is symptomatic of the 10 years of Tory rule, when we can't even be in charge of the destiny of our own football clubs.
Okay.
Such as people's disenfranchisement.
Do you think, though, I appreciate your sentiment, well, not sentiment, the facts that what you've seen from door knocking, that people think there are other issues here that matter, and that's what they're going to base their opinion on. But do you feel that when you knock on a door and someone says, great, let's have a chat about Labour, and yourself standing as my constituency MP, what is your stance on Brexit? Do you feel that the Labour stance on Brexit has now forever been clarified?
My stance on Brexit has
the Labour stance on Brexit.
Well, Labour's stance on Brexit. There's no double speak there, Alexis.
Okay.
The Labour stance on Brexit is to give it back to the people, the final say. We now know what Brexit looks like or feels like. Now we've got Johnson saying it's one thing, which is a worse version of May's. May's deal, I think, will be better suited by history than Johnson's, and that got historically thumped in the Commons. We're now told by Mr. Brexit Pure, Nigel Farage, that this isn't Brexit, that Johnson's handing the country. If I or you decide to book a holiday or buy a house or buy a car, there's the moment you make the decision on the forecourt to buy the car, then there's the sit-down chat with the fella behind the desk who's going to check the finances and do the deal, right?
But James...
Hold on, I'm answering your question. So a final say is basically we nod this through, or we say this isn't right, and that's been my position from the get-go. I said at the general election I would vote for a Brexit deal that worked best for Bury and Britain. There is no such thing as a Brexit deal that works best for Bury and Britain.
How do you know?
2.5 years.
How do you know? Because Labour's stance is you win the election, you're going to go and negotiate a brand new deal within 6 months. Then you're going to have a one-day conference to decide whether you're going to back the deal that you've negotiated or not before putting it back to the people. That's the official stance, right?
That's the official stance.
Okay.
I see no issue with that whatsoever. So look, let me answer that directly. We absolutely, and I absolutely know what a Brexit deal looks like, because it's been my job for 2.5 years to study the consequences of that. The red lines under Theresa May removed any chance of a customs union or alignment to the single market, which would have...
Yes, but forget about Theresa May. You're in power now. Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell go to Brussels and they negotiate the Labour Brexit deal. That's going to be a completely different Brexit deal.
Well, okay, I'll come on to that. But your question to me, actually, that I was trying to answer, was how do you know what the Brexit deal looks like? And I'm saying to you, there is not a Brexit deal that works best for Bury and Britain. Now, if you want a term by which I would reconsider that, belonging to a customs union and alignment to single market is a Brexit deal that would work better than the Brexit deals on offer. But I still don't believe it would be better than the current arrangement we've got with reform. And that's the position. But look, my argument at this election is that this can no longer be decided by the politicians in this Parliament, but actually Parliament needs to seek further instruction from the people on this issue. And that's what the final say policy is about.
Okay, understood. But here's the issue. You are asking for a vote for the Labour Party. The Labour Party's policy, as we've both agreed, is that within 6 months they're going to go to Brussels and negotiate a better deal. Let's put the fact that it's taken us 3 years to get to this point and the fact that the Labour Party are going to do it in 6 months aside. But let's say a lot of the groundwork has been done. And let's say for you, James... Let's say for you, James, they come back with a customs. We're in the customs union. We have access to the single market. Then what do? You're in a constituency that voted to leave. What do you do, James? Do you support in a referendum, which you've promised to the people, do you support to remain, or do you support the deal that your leadership has gone and negotiated? And the fact that you can't answer that to me, but you're asking your constituents for a vote is a bit problematic.
well, it's not problematic. You're either not listening or you just
I am listening
through questions. No, or you're working through questions. I have absolutely answered that. You haven't until now asked me what I would vote for. I would vote Remain in any subsequent final say,
right.
and that's across all my media. So I don't know where you're sort of trying to take that, but I've been consistent throughout all of that. I maintain an integrity view that is, having been elected as a known Remainer in a marginally Leave seat. My view, my judgment, is that the people need to decide what next. A customs union Brexit, by the way, was available within months of the referendum. So let's pretend that that is unavailable to us.
Yes.
And under a new government, that would of course be afforded. The fact is, it was May then Johnson's red lines that take us to a point where we've got the worst of both deals, and we risk dividing the United Kingdom. I was out launching the campaign party last night, and I was with a Northern Irishman who said to me that only now, when he hears, after 20 years, it's been about 20 years, when he hears fireworks, when he can't see the actual fireworks themselves, but just hears them, he associates it finally with fireworks as opposed to gunfire. And that is on the table here. The risk of the Northern Ireland peace process, the Good Friday Agreement, and all the things we take for granted.
We understand all that, and you've made your points very, very clear, James. Mike Indian's got a question for you.
Hi, James.
Mike.
Hi, I just wanted to ask you, isn't it going to be quite a tough fight in Bury at this election, given the fact that, first of all, the rules have changed around campaign spending, so you're not going to be able to benefit, I think, from as many, perhaps Jeremy Corbyn's star power in the seat as you might have been able to. And also the fact that there's a bit of a bun fight in your constituency neighbour because Ivan Lewis is running again against a Labour candidate. Isn't that going to take a lot of time and resources away from all branches of the Bury Labour Party? Are you worried about holding on to your seat at this election with those local factors in play?
There's about three questions there, Mike, I think. But look, I think you're very good. Very Labour Party, we're fighting fit. Very South have selected Lucy Burke this last week to fight the seat. She's got about a 5,000 majority to defend. Ivan Lewis has confirmed he is standing. Look, my concentration is on Bury North. We have come to an arrangement in Bury through the work of the Labour group on the council to fund both campaigns, but we are running separate campaigns. So I don't see a sort of division of Labour as such to the sort of premise of your question. Look, my job is to make the case for people to keep their faith in me after my first 2 years as their MP and campaign nationally for real change and the arguments that I've made. Actually, in Bury North, and Bury itself, as I've said, has always been about beyond Brexit, because it did the referendum, it went slightly more Leave than the rest of the country, but then returned by a considerable majority a Labour Remainer to represent. Now, I would put a Brexit deal in front of the country, in front of Bury, and ask people to sign it off. I don't think that's a complicated position to be in.
Olivia.
Quick question. Obviously, your stance depends on people having changed their minds since Brexiteers changing their minds and now supporting Remain to it since 2016. What's the evidence for that?
So I did two constituency-wide surveys with verification, 3,000 respondents across September-December 2017, September-December 2018, consecutive periods, and there is an 8% carry from Leave to Remain. But even with that calculation, the Leave voters I speak to, there will be those for whom this matters above all else. But does it matter more than the local football club, the walk-in centre, the hospice, the local businesses that have to put their homes on the line to borrow money to grow? And I'm saying I don't think it does. But faced with a general question at a general election, that's why I'm asking a simple point about keeping faith, or asking them to keep faith in me as the MP and for real changes in the country.
And you're not worried that those Leavers who've changed their mind will be balanced out by Remainers who Remainers who voted Remain in 2016 but now think, oh, come on, let's just get this thing done? I mean, both in Bury and nationally.
Sure. I mean, there are quite a lot of things to worry about, aren't there?
Fair enough, yeah.
And so, you know, you kind of have to choose your worries or choose your battles.
I'm just interested in people who change their minds and how many of them are
no. Well, let me just, if I may, just offer a little bit of insight into the sort of the human aspect of this. What is interesting, I think, for me, for my first 2 years, is facing a general election as essentially the one being chased rather than the chaser, and you are essentially trying to get re-elected with other people after you, as opposed to being the one that's pursuing the person in situ, and that does sort of change your frame of mind a bit, and to your point about worries. As to people changing mind, there are definitely people that have changed their mind, but there are those believers that say, yeah, okay, well, let's have it again, let's sign it off, and yes, I might vote the same way, or I might change my mind, or I might not vote. As to the Remainer point, and it's a really good question, so people know me locally as a Remainer, but that someone who has tried to essentially kind of square this off, a sort of Remainers Brexit, I think Nigel Farage called it. I actually used a phrase of it being for the 48 and the 52, a Brexit that works for both sides. Should have been the endeavour that Theresa May actually, when she won the 2017 election, should have gone after. I think she could have unified, and Johnson's just repeated the same tendency to talk to his hard right Brexiteer backbenchers, ignoring the DUP and the consequences of his deal. So, look, I'm asking people to keep their faith in me and asking them in good faith to consider what's best for the country. Finally on that, in this seat, you could find a party that is saying more clearly, more strongly, that they will just simply undo the last result of the referendum and vote for them. But in doing so, you will enable a hard right Tory Brexit. It is a two-horse race in Bury North, and I'm making the case for people to keep their faith in me.
OK, James, I really appreciate your time. That's James Frith, Labour MP for Bury North. Plenty of your texts and tweets coming in, which I shall read after the break. Remember, you can watch us live on our YouTube page, on our Facebook page. You could tweet us at Talk Radio. You could text the word TALK to 87222. And, of course, you can call us 0344 499 1000. That's the number you need. We'll be straight back after this.
We are
Talk Radio.
Sky Store. You're in for a web-slinging adventure.
What is going on?
The snap tore a hole in our dimension. I need a new team. I need an Avenger.
I've got this.
You can now catch Spider-Man Far From Home straight from the cinema.
Awesome!
And watch Spider-Man save the world from the comfort of your sofa.
Mr. Stark trusted me. I am not going to let him down. Let's go save the world, Spider-Man.
You got gifts, Parker. The world needs that.
So much for friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
Woo! Spider-Man Far From Home, available now in Sky Store.
3 is a magic number. 300 schemes to help bugs and bees, supporting environmental needs. 8,000 grants for local sports, and performing arts get our support. 7 millionaires every week, the nation's on a winning streak. 30 million pounds to good causes every week. Who'd have thought it? These are magic numbers.
Your numbers make amazing happen. 25 years of the National Lottery.
Rules and procedures apply. Players must be 16 or over.
Gosh, can we put the heating on?
Sorry, it's broken.
Can I play some tunes on my phone then?
Yeah, afraid not. Play CDs though.
This car belongs in a scrapyard.
I know, but I get nothing if I scrapped it.
Actually, you can get at least £2,000 off a new Ford for it.
Really?
With Ford's New for Old scrappage scheme, you can get between £2,000 and £4,250 off a new Ford car if you scrap an eligible vehicle with us responsibly. Also, there's 0% APR representative on Ford options. Ford. Together, we go further. Search Ford Scrappage. Exclusions apply. Contracted and registered by 31st of December 2019 at participating dealers. Age and ownership criteria apply to scrappage vehicle. Subject to status. Free post Ford credit.
Order! Point of order!
With With analysis and opinion from the best connected journalists in Westminster, The Times and The Sunday Times can help you make sense of the political jungle. Visit thetimes.co.uk or pick up your copy today.
Talk Radio Traffic and Travel.
In Surrey, the M23 is currently blocked because of a serious accident between the M25 and the A23 at Utley. Particularly heavy delays on the M25 on the clockwise side. In Staffordshire, on the M6 northbound between junction 12 at Gailey and 13 at Stafford South, are broken down vehicles blocking lane 1. Staying in Staffordshire, on the M6 northbound between junction 14 for Stafford North and 15 for Stoke-on-Trent, we've got a lane closed for emergency repairs. And in Derbyshire, on the M1 southbound between junction 29 for Chesterfield and junction 28, broken down cars blocking a lane. I'm Michael Payne.
Welcome inside Rachel's mind. She's unsure if now's the time to sell her home.
Should we stay put or sell up? Wait. It's definitely best to wait.
No, sell. Definitely sell.
Relax, Rachel. Purple Bricks has sold more homes than any other estate agent for 2 years running. Purple Bricks. You'll be totally sold.
Independent sales data from 20CI, May 17, April 19. Fixed fee payable on instruction or after 10 months. Viewing services cost extra.
Outspoken opinions and decisive debate. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the show with me, Alexis Conran, here on Talk Radio with the Times. Know your times. And remember, Talk Radio is your election station. It all kicks off after next Wednesday. With me, I have Mike Indian and Olivia Utley. And we've been getting quite a few of your messages. Jazz in Brighton says, great show as usual, dear boy. Thank you. I love it when people call me dear boy. Dear boy. Dear boy. I was very upset that man Trump dared to interfere in our politics. The interview was set up by Farage on his last show before elections on LBC. It served to distract from the Brexit fiasco on Halloween. Endorse Farage in his offer to Boris the next morning. And for Trump, it served to overshadow, and I think this is important, the news that he will be impeached. Farage should leave my country, he says. Sure, Uncle Trump will give him a job. I wonder if Nigel Farage not standing will mean that he can continue his broadcasting duties, or being the leader of the party, he may not be allowed.
Yeah, I hadn't considered that, but I think that's probably a very
interesting.
Good point.
John on YouTube says, Cummings has been clever. He has managed to turn the election into either Boris's deal or a second referendum. Interesting, because it is going to come to that. Ptolemy, wow, we're getting quite sort of historical and classical here, on YouTube says, so his solution is yet another referendum that's bound to unify the country. I think that's sarcasm there. What if it ends up 1-1? Do we have a third? There's an interesting point, isn't it? Advocates of a second referendum, and I can see the logic in it, and saying, well, you know, what if Remain wins 52-48? What do we do then? But is there a reasonable argument, Olivia, to expect that actually whatever the referendum is going to be, if Labour or the Lib Dems or whoever wins, and we do go to another referendum by various avenues that we discussed in the first hour, we are not going to be having a vague referendum of Remain or Leave. We can all agree that Leave was a very vague thing. And, you know, to all those people who miraculously have disappeared from my Twitter feed and the Talk Radio Twitter feed that kept badgering me months ago saying 17.5 million people voted for no deal or all knew what they were voting for, I think we can definitely, you know, disseminate that argument, because if you've got Nigel Farage saying one thing, Boris Johnson saying another, then you definitely have proof that 17.4 million people did not vote for the same thing. So the second referendum will not be Remain or Leave, it will be Remain or this deal, which we know exactly what it says.
But I think it would be pretty contentious splitting the Brexit vote. You'd get, because you've got, if you've got Boris's deal, then you've got quite a big proportion of the country who wouldn't be represented because they want no deal, and that would be very difficult. So I think you'd get quite a lot of Leavers boycotting a second referendum.
But you can argue the same the other way. You can argue that you'll have quite a lot of people saying, well, I want to remain, but I don't want to remain with the EU. Like, I want to remain and reform.
Well, exactly,
you know, where do they go?
Which is why I think a second referendum isn't a very good idea, because whatever the result, it's going to be quite hard to claim a mandate for it, like a real mandate.
But then do you agree with the Lib Dem stance of if we win, we just revoke the whole thing?
I mean, I think that's politically, I think that's a really bad stance for Lib Dems to take, because I think they were far more likely to hoover up sort of moderate Labour who don't like Jeremy Corbyn if they'd stuck with a people's vote, whereas revoke Article 50 is just clearly kind of massively undermining democracy, and a lot of Remainers won't agree with that. But I suppose I see the argument that if the Lib Dems somehow win a majority, then that is obviously a mandate for revoke. That's why I think a general election is a better way to solve this problem than a referendum. You've got three parties saying this is exactly what I'm going to do. Vote for the one that you want, rather than a difficult Brexit question.
Well, Alan on Facebook says, all these promises these parties are promising, if they don't deliver, can we rerun the election? Alan, you haven't been paying attention. Pretty much every manifesto that gets voted in half of it gets delivered. I mean, you know, there's so many U-turns for most parties, right, Mike?
Well, Alan's got a point, actually, because unlike a referendum, there's every chance that if this election delivers a la December 1910, a dead heat, I'm talking both parties getting the same number of seats, say that's the nightmare scenario, then we can always have another election. Referendums are complicated things in this country. You have to have an act to legislate for them, you have to check the question, you have to have a campaigning period. And this is where I think Labour's Brexit stance, when we're talking to James Frith, comes unstuck, because Corbyn's had to come out this week and say for the first time how long he would take to sort Brexit out, and he said 6 months. Now, for a lot of people, I think the adage that they're pretty sick to death of the whole Brexit debate, irrespective of however they voted, with the exception of a few probably diehard People's Vote supporters, and that organisation's had its own problems this week as well, are pretty... It holds up for me. So this is why Labour's going to struggle to sell its policy on the doorstep at this campaign, because they're going to be turning up on a dark December night and saying, oh, let us, vote for us, then we'll have a bill and a special conference and a second referendum, and it seems interminable as well. We've lost sight, really, of what the end goal of this should be.
But Mike, don't you think, sorry to interrupt you in there, but don't you think that a lot of people, and there was a study that came out, one of those polls that came out, where there's an actual misconception for people who are pro-Boris Johnson's deal, because they believe that once this deal goes through, that's it. We've done. We've left. But actually, as you and I know, and Olivia knows, and most people who really engage with this, and this is not a criticism on the average people, because why should people be worried about what a withdrawal agreement is and what a customs union is? But the reality of it is that everybody who knows that the reality is that even when this deal goes through, then the real negotiations start of this free trade agreement.
Well, here's the thing. Boris is actively doing what he's done since he became Prime Minister and before that. He's actively stoking this misconception. I'd say almost, I wouldn't say accuse him of lying, but
because he keeps get Brexit done.
He says, stick the deal in the oven for 20 minutes and we're done. It doesn't work like that. Irrespective of whatever outcome we have, whether it's deal, no deal, second referendum, any sort of, there's always going to be some form of aftermath. And if it's, even if it's no deal, we're talking about dozens, possibly even hundreds of bilateral negotiations. If it's, for example, a deal, you have to negotiate a free trade arrangement as well. We're talking about potentially months or years of ongoing talks. And to tell people at this election that this is about getting Brexit completely sorted is deeply, deeply dishonest.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. I think that, but I also think that anyone who's saying, well, never mind, we can just remain in the EU and forget all about this is being disingenuous as well. Because either we've got policy problems of Brexit taking absolutely ages to get through and voting for Boris's deal isn't a vote to stop talking about Brexit, which it obviously isn't, because as we've said, so much is going to happen after the withdrawal agreement. But voting for anyone else isn't, you can't put the genie back in the bottle now. I mean, policy-wise, yeah, we could just remain in the EU, but politically, you've got a lot of people who would feel that that democracy isn't working for them anymore, and politically, that's a huge problem.
But do you think? And again, I don't want to belittle anyone at all who might say, well, I don't think democracy is working because the result of the first referendum wasn't carried through. We have to accept that democracy doesn't stop on one day in June 2016. Democracy is a living, continuing thing. And when circumstances change, then the right course of action can also change. So you can't stifle democracy by having another vote, by asking people to exercise their democratic right. I agree with you saying that you can't put the genie back in the bottle, but that genie was released because of various things, various domestic things, and actually addressing the issues that why people voted for Brexit, perhaps would be a good starting point, rather than spend another 3 years, and this is the only part of that I agree with Nigel Farage, that a free trade agreement with the EU is going to take 3 years minimum. And can you imagine how irritated the British public are going to be that after they've voted to, quote, get Brexit done, they are dealing with another 3 years of negotiating with the EU at a minimum?
I agree with that, but also I do think that, and I know I agree that democracy didn't stop on June the 26th, God, what day was it? The 23rd. But I do think, I mean, yes, you can look at it from that perspective, but you can also look at it from the perspective of, OK, we have a second referendum. Remain wins, 51-49 or something. And then, come on, don't you think there would be a lot of Brexiteers who just said, what, we've had 2 votes. We won the last one with a bigger majority. How can, it does look like some sort of establishment stitch-up. I'm not saying it is, but you can see how that would play out to voters and how that could,
it's
seriously prove problems.
It's not a great option. We're going to take a very quick break, but after that, I want to discuss something that I think is going to be quite prominent in this election campaign, and that's namely political advertising on social media. We're going to be joined on the line by Philip Ingram, who's a journalist specialising in intelligence and security. Why? Well, because at the moment we have reports that Boris Johnson may be sitting, well, he is sitting on a report that was carried out on perhaps evidence of Russian interfering in the Brexit referendum. Now, a source at Number 10 has said there's nothing in that report that is of any concern, which begs the question of why sit on it, just release it. But how concerned should we be, and how confident are we that this election is going to be a free and fair one?
The voice of reason is on Talk Radio.
Hello, I'm James Whale.
Get in the ring with the legendary James Whale.
When I say hang on, will you shut up?
The radio presenter who isn't afraid to tell you what to think.
Quite frankly, this is the most ridiculously stupid idea I've ever heard.
Hard-boiled conversation from the man with the pinball smile and the cue ball head.
This man needs to be called to account. So where is he? Can we get his home number and ring him?
All hail the Whale.
I'm being over rude, I know.
The James Whale Show. Tomorrow night from 7 on Talk Radio. Across the UK, online and on DAB digital radio. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the show. Remember, after 12 o'clock, Femi Oluwole joins me here in the studio. You can watch that live on YouTube and our Facebook page. You can get in touch with the show at Talk Radio. You could text the word TALK to 87222, or you could tweet us at Talk Radio. With me, I have Mike Indian, political editor at The Groucho Tendency, and Olivia Utley, deputy director at The Article. And I am joined on the line by Philip Ingram, journalist specialising in intelligence. Philip, welcome back to the show.
Good morning. Good to be back.
Philip, we heard news from Twitter this week. Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, said that they have banned political advertising. He has made some very good points of, I think it was a bit of a dig at Facebook, which has had its own problems with political advertising and the links to Cambridge Analytica and the likes, saying it's all very well if we want to protect free speech, but if someone pays us enough, we let them on the platform and they can say what they want. How big of a change do you think this could possibly make?
Well, political advertising, I don't think I don't think the rules have grown up to understand the influence that there is through artificial intelligence that's out there and gathering and analysing big data, and then the ability to target the information that you got from that through targeted political adverts to stimulate responses in individuals. This is where I think the only way to properly deal with it at the moment, until regulation catches up, is to do what Twitter have done and ban political advertising. It comes down to the influence of the messaging that goes out, but also looking back, and I think this is the issue that is coming out in the report that Number 10 are going to release tomorrow, in who's funding that, and that's not always as visible as it should be.
When you say who's funding that, can you explain a little bit what's going to be behind that report?
Well, behind that report, there's the accusation of undue Russian influence in the Brexit referendum. Now, this is nothing new. Kieran Martin, who's the chief executive of GCHQ's National Cyber Security Centre, has publicly warned that the British political processes are at risk of interference by Kremlin-backed cyber criminals. There's been evidence of the Russians trying to interfere in the German Parliament's computer network in 2015, trying to interfere in US elections. So this is nothing new. but the legislation that's out there hasn't really caught up with who's funding things, the ability that there is to work stuff inside cybersphere, and to bring that regulation forward in such a way that we can ensure free and fair elections and free and fair advertising and information being passed to the voting electorate. There's so many examples of where people are being misled.
Philip, do you think that with your incredible knowledge of how these things actually work, my limited knowledge, just focusing on, for example, telephony and phone spoofing and text spoofing and all these things, do you think that even if the will was there, let's say, from Facebook and from the social media platforms to crack down on fake news, to crack down on the bots, to crack down on political advertising, do you still think it's enforceable? And let me give you an example. I could set up a page, pretend that I could be a shill for a political party and say, well, I'm just putting out these homemade videos, which I'm paying from my own pocket to promote. I cannot be affiliated to any one of the political parties, but yet I'm still getting that political messaging out there. So my question, I guess, is, even if the will was there, is it enforceable?
Enforceable, probably not. What it's doing is it's reducing some of the mechanisms for getting that message out there and physically targeted to individuals in a way that isn't obvious. Facebook, Twitter, a lot of what the accusations have come in from the Russians is the use of bots, so automated accounts that have been set up to target particular messages out to individuals. Is it going to stop the messages getting out? No. If we go back to 2017, Nigel Farage was forced to admit that the Westminster terror attack was unrelated to immigration. He'd put that comment out on Fox News, and you will still find that the politicians are putting the messages out in certain ways to stimulate a response. There are sort of two types. It's all advertising, it's all marketing, but it's in a very sophisticated and slightly underhanded way whenever it comes to manipulating how people are thinking and ultimately trying to manipulate people's behaviour to vote in a certain way.
Do we have any evidence, though, that it works, Philip? And I ask this because already I'm getting messages from people saying that no Russian bot could change my mind. I'm not a sheep. I know how things work, and I'm not going to be influenced. And we heard that after the post the 2016 referendum. We heard that people didn't believe the lies or the campaigns, and they voted for their own reasons. Do we actually have any evidence that this sort of the astroturfing, the fake adverts from either side actually have an effect?
Huge amounts of evidence that are out there. I'll quote a couple of bits. There's an individual called Victor Dantrou, who was at the Bucharest University of Economic Studies. He put a paper out in 2014 titled "Manipulative Marketing, Persuasion and Manipulation of the Customer Through Advertising." Now, he went into how you can persuade people and work through, but one of the things that he said in his comments that the most important and effective linguistic manipulation is that of subliminal advertising, which aims at the subliminal subduction of the customer. And therefore, it's quite right. People say, I've made my own mind up. I know my mind and all the rest of it. But the advertising is designed in such a way that it's not being obvious. It's not being shoved in your face. It's something that is very subtly providing messaging. So, for example, if you're an NHS worker or you're just out of hospital, you might see a disproportionate number of political campaigns coming into your inbox or on social media that are talking about lack of funding in the health service, about the NHS being sold off to the Americans, about increased funding and recruiting more doctors and nurses in the health service, depending on which political side that you're coming from. But someone somewhere will have had a computer system analysing your profile and working out that those are the sorts of messages that, if they're targeted at you, will stimulate a response for you to vote in a particular way.
Question from Mike.
Good morning, Philip. I had a quick question about the timing of the report's publication. Dominic Grieve has said that he hopes voters would consider it carefully ahead of the general election campaign. isn't it simply going to be used by certain vocal groups on both sides, particularly of the Brexit divide, to reaffirm certain arguments, certainly perhaps on the Remain side about, we knew the 2016 referendum was a bust, for example, because of Russian interference. Isn't it, obviously this is being released with the best intentions, but isn't there a danger that the rather complicated messages in it could be lost in a less than nuanced political climate?
Yeah, I think one of the problems we've got is we're in a soundbite political climate, and therefore everyone will take every report about everything that's coming out and try and extract the sound bites out of it that they think will reinforce their particular message and their particular side of things, and put those sound bites out in such a way that it will influence not necessarily the confirmed voters for what they're doing, but those that are sort of swinging one way or the other, and try to get them thinking their way. And it's when that is the danger is when that messaging is targeted because someone has got a much more detailed understanding of what makes an individual or an individual's family tick. From an emotional perspective, you're hacking. You're effectively getting into hacking. The serotonin levels in the brain, the dopamine, the oxytocin, the endorphins. They're known as the feel-good quartet. But they, you look at the decision making, and that's what this advertising is trying to do. It's very, very sophisticated, and I don't think people properly understand it and understand how you can influence in that way.
Philip, thank you so much for your time. Always a pleasure speaking with you. That's Philip Ingram, journalist specialising in intelligence and security. Definitely worth a follow on Twitter. You can find him there. We're going to take a quick break, and we've got plenty of your messages to get through before the last part of the show. After the 12 o'clock news, Femi Oluwole from Our Future, Our Choice will join me in the studio. You can watch us live on YouTube, live on Facebook. You can tweet the show at Talk Radio. You can text the word talk to 87222, followed by your message. We'll be straight back after this break.
Across the UK, online and on DAB.
Your election station, Talk Radio. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio with The Times and The Sunday Times. Know your times.
Philip Schofield here. Question for you. Imagine you're buying a lovely new velour roll-neck sweater. Would you trade in your favourite old jumper for a discount? Of course you wouldn't. So why part exchange when you switch cars? Wouldn't it be better to keep it simple? Selling with WeBuyAnyCar.com could put you in the driving seat to get a great deal on your next car. Enter your reg number now at WeBuyAnyCar.com.
Admin fee may apply. For more information, see WeBuyAnyCar.com/info.
You're trying to leave the house, but not before you dress the kids, pack their lunch and track down that missing shoe. So forgetting to turn the heating off is easily done. But it's nice to know with Hive Active Heating, a Which Best Buy, you can turn your heating off from wherever you are. And by never having to heat an empty home, you could save up to £120 a year on your heating bill. Search Hive Heating to buy now. Hive services require broadband and Wi-Fi. Terms apply.
Today, it's Crystal Palace v Leicester and Everton v Tottenham in a cracking double-header. And with no TV, you can watch both games live for a one-off payment of just $9.99. Hold on, they're checking with VAR.
That's confirmed, it's $9.99.
Unbelievable stuff. So, to only pay for the games that matter to you, grab a Now TV Sky Sports Day Pass. Search Now TV Sports. 18 plus, content streamed via internet, full terms apply.
At DFS, Autumn-Winter Collection sofas are up to half price. Many are guaranteed to be delivered before Christmas. Until Monday, get early bird extra savings on selected sofas. DFS.
Gotta do a Sun Bingo commercial. It needs to stand out. Oh, what about this?
All players get a free £10 bingo bonus at Sun Bingo. No deposit required.
Yeah, smashed it. Offer until the 30th of November. Opt into marketing and verify account by SMS. 4 times wagering on bingo bonus and valid for 7 days. 18 plus. T's and C's apply. Please play responsibly.
Talk Radio, traffic and travel.
Sunny in Surrey, the M23 is currently closed both ways between the M25 and the A23 at Utley. That's because of a serious accident the air ambulance is attending. The worst of the delays on the M25 clockwise going from Junction 6 and the M23 northbound. In Staffordshire on the M6 northbound between Junction 14 for Stafford North and 15 for Stoke-on-Trent, 2 lanes are closed for emergency repairs, which is causing delays. And on the M1 southbound in Derbyshire between Junction 29 for Chesterfield and 28 for Alfreton, a broken down car is blocking lane 1. I'm Michael Page.
Welcome inside Rachel's mind. She's unsure if now's the time to sell her home.
Should we stay put or sell up? Wait. It's definitely best to wait.
No, sell. Definitely sell.
Relax, Rachel. Purple Bricks have sold more homes than any other estate agent for 2 years running. Purple Bricks. You'll be totally sold.
Independent sales data from 20CI, May 17, April 19. Fixed fee payable on instruction or after 10 months. Viewing services cost extra.
This is the ballad of Eamon Holmes, OBE.
Well, he started in telly back in '79, did the farming news for quite some time. The first year they had him counting cows and winter ran.
63, 64, 65.
But everything changed in '93. He got the breakfast gig on GMTV. He made his throne the most famous sofa in the land.
This is more like it.
But he wanted more than a daytime show, so he figured he'd give the airwaves a go. And he could win himself a whole new army of fans.
Piece of cake.
He got it one job at a time, and I guess it turned out just fine. The fella's got a natural primetime glow.
Good morning, ladies.
He's gonna drive you home in style. Serious news, but with a smile. Eamon Holmes is on Talk Radio.
Yep, that's me, a boy named Eamon. Tomorrow afternoon from 4, only on Talk Radio.
Outspoken opinions and decisive debate. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio.
Well, welcome back to the last part of the show with me, Alexis Conran, here on Talk Radio with the Times. Know your times. Talk Radio is, of course, your election station. My guests have been Mike Indian, political editor at The Groucho Tendency, and Olivia Utley, deputy editor at The Article. Some of your messages here that we can all enjoy. We talked about that. Right. John on YouTube says, Farage just wants to preserve his place as a rabble-rouser. He is too frightened to take any real responsibility. Well, he has sort of bamboozled us with that news today that he's not standing. Does it... I can't see the long play in this. It does feel like he's just thrown the Brexit Party under a bus.
I actually want to come back to something. I went to a podcast recording with Rory Stewart talking politics earlier this week, and Rory Stewart I asked Rory Stewart why is he leaving Parliament, running for London Mayor, and he made a very good point. MPs enjoy a lot of status, but they lack a lot of power. Nigel Farage is far more influential outside Parliament than he is inside of it, because he'd maybe have 6 to 10 MPs, perhaps at the most. And parliamentary procedure means he wouldn't have a lot of a platform. Outside Parliament, people will see his social media clips from the European Parliament, they'll go to his rallies, and that's always been where Farage has been most effective. And also, as Olivia says, chances are he might not win his seat again, and that's deeply embarrassing for him.
Yeah, I hate myself for saying so, but my former co-host and sometimes a guest on the show, former Conservative MP for Enfield North, Nick Dubois, we disagree on everything, but we are good friends. He wrote a very, very good book called Confessions of a Recovering MP. And I remember reading it. One of the big impressions was that you get to Parliament, especially as a new MP, and you have no power at all. Your constituents think that you are going to save the day on everything. And you literally arrive in Parliament, and other MPs who've been there before or who are the front benches say, who are you?
Yeah.
What power have you? What can you do for us?
And actually, local councillors are so much more powerful with most. I used to work in Parliament, and the amount of letters we get from constituents asking for something, and every single time it's like, what shall I do with this? Oh, send it to the councillor. They actually have money. They've got a budget. They can actually solve your problems.
It's quite extraordinary. Darren on Facebook says, Bojo, let's call him Mr. Johnson, shall we?
Johnson.
I've heard rumours he hates being called Mr. Johnson. He loves being called Boris.
I bet he does.
We wouldn't.
We don't call him Boris here. Mr. Johnson has made this election the people versus Parliament. He has quietly organised this so it takes the heat off a mess they've made with the NHS, austerity, Grenfell, etc. We were talking in the break how tricky it's going to be, and it's tricky for any incumbent government, but I was struggling, Olivia, to see where the Conservatives can really come out and say, you know, when they come out and say, we're going to put 20,000 police officers on the street, it's like, yeah, those are the 20,000 that you took away in your 9 years in government. We're going to invest in the NHS. Yeah, that's because you already cut. Like every avenue they go, NHS, police and schools, they are in a mess because we've had 9 years of Tory austerity.
I think as well the problem is that it's particularly difficult for this incumbent government because we've had 3 different Conservative Prime Ministers since the Conservative Party came into power in 2010, and so much has changed since Cameron became Prime Minister that there isn't even a kind of coherent Tory strategy that Boris can stick up for in the coming election. So I think what it basically comes down to is Labour, I think, will want to fight this election, will want this not to be a Brexit election, and the Conservatives will want this to be a Brexit election.
Yeah. Mike?
The trouble is, and the fact we haven't talked about Labour's Green Homes announcement this morning really says, I think, that the Tories have the messaging on this election down pat. It has to be about Brexit. Even James Frith tried to say, he contradicted himself in the interview earlier. He said, on the one hand, this election has to be about more than Brexit. On the other hand, we need an instruction about Brexit. The real problem is that we are seeing the model of what we want from democratic government in this country changing. The old model of representative democracy is no longer fit for purpose in most people's opinions. They want more of a say in how their lives are chosen. This is reflected in every aspect of how we live our lives, particularly in, for example, the gig economy. You can now have so much choice except in how our country is run. And for any MP going to this election, whatever party, they're going to have to grapple with this over the next 4 or 5 years, irrespective of... This is why a second referendum, although not desirable, at least fits into that mould. But you can't have a representative institution like Parliament. People don't just want to hand their MPs an instruction now for 5 years. They want a mechanism by which they have to say. And as we've mentioned before, MPs actually enjoy a lot of status, but very little power.
What do you make of the one of the other rows that emerged this week of... the Jo Swinson having a go at ITV because she has not been invited to partake in the leadership debate. That debate on the 19th of November will be between Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn. Do you think she has a point?
I think she probably does have a point, actually. I thought it was absolutely ridiculous, the people saying that Boris and Corbyn don't want her on because, Mr. Johnson and Corbyn don't want her on because they're sexist. I mean, that's completely patently absurd. They don't want her on because they're worried about having her on. But I don't think you can sideline the Lib Dems at this point. We know that they're a force to be reckoned with. We know that they're gaining popularity all the time. I think she really should be in the debate.
Mike?
You see, I'm inclined to say that Jo Swinson shouldn't be in the debate because this claim the Lib Dems are going to win an overall majority is ludicrous. Nicola Sturgeon should be on the stage because the SNP are the third largest party in Parliament and she's the First Minister of Scotland, and Scotland is going to play a very important role in this election. Jo Swinson has had a rather extraordinary and incredibly successful first few months as Lib Dem leader, but she still only has 20 MPs. The Lib Dems are polling about 15% at the moment. This isn't quite the same balance. They're not going to... They aren't vying for a potential coalition here as well. Yes, they should be given a platform down the line, but ultimately, realistically, the next Prime Minister is either going to be Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn. This isn't about gender or sexism. This is about pure political reality.
But back in 2010, 2015, we had, I agree with Nick, all those, Nick Clegg was up, Gordon Brown was up, David Cameron. We had those big debates involving everybody, Nigel Farage. Why this time we're focusing on just Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn?
Because
for this one specific debate, we must be clear.
Because this time round, the person who will be in Brussels negotiating Brexit or trying to get a deal through or a new deal will either be Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn. In 2010, the Lib Dems had 3 times as many MPs as they did now. There was a lot of talk about a hung parliament. There was a great deal of uncertainty. Now the Lib Dems are the 4th or 5th biggest party inside the Commons chamber. They've had 3 or 4 years of relative obscurity and they are on their way back. But they're not putting themselves forward here as potential coalition partners here. They are putting themselves forward as the party that wants to stop Brexit.
Yeah, and I also think that sort of fair enough, actually, from ITV and the other political and the other media stations, that we have seen over the last few years that huge debates with sort of 5 or 6 leaders standing up, or seven, exactly. Once you've got Jo Swinson, you've got to have the SNP, etc., and just they don't really work. It's very difficult for viewers to hear anything.
Agreed, and I mean everybody's going to have their own views. The only point that I would make is that we agreed in the first hour and before we even started the show that Jo Swinson will have a big part to play.
She will do.
Because she may be the one that decides who gets to form a government should we end up with a hung parliament. Of course, you could make the same argument with the SNPs as well.
She also, don't forget, she also has to keep her seat as well because she's going to face a very strong challenge from the SNP in Scotland too. Now, she's a very gifted campaigner and there will be other debates down the line as well she can take part in. But the opening debate in this campaign, and there will be more and I think one thing the broadcasters shouldn't do is acquiesce to Downing Street's narrative of this just being a 2-horse race, but the opening debate has to set the stage of being Boris versus Corbyn.
OK, we've taken it up to the wire. Thank thank you so much, both. Mike Indian, political editor at the Groucho Tendency. Olivia Utley, thank you very much for joining us as well, deputy editor at The Article. Thank you both. Lots to happen, of course, and I hope to see you both before the result of the general election. Just before you go, though, I'm going to put you on the spot. Not what you want to see, but what do you think is the most likely outcome? Olivia?
A small Tory majority?
Perhaps. Maybe. Mike?
I think Boris is going to win a large overall majority.
Goodness me, really?
Yes.
40
seat majority.
A 40-seat majority for Boris Johnson. I don't know where he gets those seats, Mike, but I'm sure you and I will carry on this conversation. Thank you very much, both to you. Next up is the 12 o'clock news, and straight after that, Femi Oluwole from Our Future, Our Choice joins me here in the studio. You can watch us live on YouTube and Facebook. You can tweet at Talk Radio. You can call in, ask your questions and have a chat with me and Femi at 0344 499 1000 is the number you need, or you can tweet us at Talk Radio. I've said that. You can text us, text talk to 87222. It's the 12 o'clock news next.
We are
Talk Radio.
The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio with The Times and The Sunday Times. Know your times.
You want to keep your savings for the things you love this Christmas, not a new boiler. We're with you. So our boilers come with 2 years interest-free credit, so you can keep your savings for a Merry Christmas. Plus, get a 5-year British Gas warranty, and we can quote by video call after work or weekends. Get a quote by the 30th of November and get £150 off a new boiler, or £450 off for existing home care customers. Search British Gas New Boiler. Conditions apply.
We've been together 3 years. We both love travel, and luckily we've got the same taste in music. Next year, we're planning a big road trip, and my wife's coming too. It'll be nice. The three of us don't do enough together. We know how much your Mini means to you. That's why Mini Service offers an array of convenient options and allows you to book online anytime at mini.co.uk. Because we love your Mini almost as much as you do. Search Mini Service. Who's in? T's and C's apply, subject to availability, participating retailers only.
She did it! Her first word! Go on, say it again for Mummy.
Nada. Mama.
Oh.
Savings.
Did you hear that?
Savings account.
Teaching your kids how to save may not be this easy, but you can get them learning good habits and skills from an early age, thanks to the range of children's savings accounts from Yorkshire Building Society. Just another example of real help with real life. Find out more at ybs.co.uk.
We are delighted to announce the Duchess of Cambridge's fabulous magazine special. We'll be revealing her style and beauty secrets, plus pictures galore in the glossy 52-page magazine. We can officially confirm that it is an absolute belter. Pick up the Sun on Sunday this weekend.
On DAB, online and on your mobile. All the latest election news as soon as it breaks on the station that's going to the country. Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online and on DAB.
Talk Radio on the Hour News headlines.
It's midday, I'm Daryl Jackson. Labour's setting out plans to spend £60 billion improving every home in the UK. It says it wants housing to be better insulated, warmer and more energy efficient. The party says it'll be funded by borrowing. Shadow Business Secretary Rebecca Long-Bailey explains how it could work.
We're looking at generating over 400,000 jobs and supporting businesses throughout the economy. So by 2030, the increased tax take, VAT, corporation tax, national insurance, income tax, more than recoups that £60 billion outlay.
Meanwhile, Nigel Farage has made the surprise announcement that he won't stand to be an MP at the general election. The Brexit Party leader says he believes he can serve the cause of leaving the EU more effectively by campaigning across the country. A 36-year-old man's being killed after a car crashed into a pub in Essex. It's understood the vehicle drove into the beer garden in Colchester in the early hours of this morning. A man's in custody on suspicion of murder. Airbnb says it's banning party houses. The online holiday booking firm made the decision after 5 people were killed at a Halloween event in California on Thursday. An outfit worn by Olivia Newton-John in the 1970s hit Grease has sold for £313,000 at auction. The iconic tight black trousers and leather jacket fetched more than double the expected price. Onto the weather, a mix of rain, showers and sunny spells, most of the rain over eastern and northern Scotland.
Talk Radio Sports Update.
Leicester visit Crystal Palace in the first of 2 Premier League fixtures today. Brendan Rodgers' side could move up to third with a win, but they have a poor recent record against Palace, losing their last 4 meetings. Elsewhere, Everton host Tottenham this afternoon, with both clubs in desperate need of Premier League points. Marco Silva's side are just 1 spot above the relegation zone. Leaders Liverpool remain unbeaten and 6 points clear at the top of the Premier League, but they had to survive a scare against Aston Villa, grabbing a 94th minute winner in the 2-1 comeback victory. Nearest challengers, Manchester City, also had to come back from behind as they beat Southampton by the same scoreline. Arsenal surrendered another lead as they drew 1-1 at home to Wolves, while Bournemouth beat Manchester United 1-0.
Talk Radio. Across the UK, online and on DAB Digital Radio.
Talk Politics with Alexis Conran on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the show with me, Alexis Conran, here on Talk Radio. You're listening to Talk Politics here with The Times. Know your times. You can watch us on Facebook and on YouTube being streamed live, and you can tweet at Talk Radio or call us 0344 499 1000 is the number you need. The reason you'd want to watch us right now is because Femi has joined me. Femi Oluwole is here from Our Future, Our Choice. He's just about here. Mm-hmm. He's sort of fighting on.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to say, since this whole thing has started, you have not stopped, have you?
No. The last day that I took where I didn't do anything in relation to Brexit, social media included, was probably at some point in early 2016. It has been non-stop. The reason why my voice sounds like I should be singing Smelly Cat is because I am currently ill. I think my antibodies just gave up after the 31st of October.
Are you not... I mean, are you not done with it now? Now, when I say done with it, I know you're passionate. Everybody knows that you're passionate, whether they agree with you or disagree with you. I don't think anybody can question your commitment to what you believe is best for this country. And again, a lot of people will disagree with what you think is best. But have you not reached that point where you just think, do you know what, I've done more than most. I'm just going to take a back seat now and just let it sort itself out?
So that's the idea of Brexit fatigue, that I'm bored of it or I'm tired of it. The fact is, anybody who's thinking, well, this has gone on for so long, we have to just get this done, isn't thinking long term. Because if Boris Johnson's deal goes through, if any version of Brexit goes through, that's years of negotiations, and that's unavoidable. Because have we even agreed what sort of relationship we want with the EU long term? Do we know that whether or not we're going to be following the regulations of the EU? Do we know what the tariff schedule is going to be? No. We haven't even decided that on ourselves, let alone negotiated that. So that's going to be years, not months, which is what would be required for a referendum. Years. So if you are bored of Brexit, Brexit is your worst enemy.
What do you make of the Get Brexit Done motto that the Conservatives... I mean, I know this is a sort of a terrible journalism from my part because I'm just giving you a freebie here. But look, I mean, no, Mike mentioned it earlier on the show, saying that, look, this idea of Get Brexit Done is dishonest and disingenuous because it doesn't go away.
No. I mean, the thing is, if you just listen to Boris Johnson, you can hear that he's contradicting himself. He says, let's get Brexit done so we can move on to the next phase. Well, hang on, which one is it? Either Brexit's done or we're moving on to the next phase of Brexit. If we haven't negotiated our new relationship with the EU, we're still going to be having the same arguments. I mean, the essence of the argument we've been having for the past few years is largely about economics versus sovereignty. Are we going to, because we know that if we have shared laws with the rest of the EU, it makes it easier to have just-in-time supply chains because any product made on one side of the border is automatically legal on the other. Now, if we're going to keep following the rules of the EU, we end up less sovereign than we currently are. And we haven't, as a country, come to the decision as to where that balance should lie. And so, moving forward, there may be Tories that vote through Boris Johnson's Brexit deal who then turn around and say, no, to protect business, we need to keep following the rules of the EU, which means this will go on and on and on. The arguments will go on and on and on. And the one thing uniting the country right now is that we're all bored of Brexit.
What has been your reaction to the biggest news of the day, I guess, which is Nigel Farage has chosen not to stand for a general election? Do you think it is going to have a knock-on effect, or do you think, well, he's tried 7 times, he wasn't likely to win the 8th time, it makes no difference whatsoever?
I think he's... it would obviously be horrible if Nigel Farage was to make it into the Cabinet Office. But I think it's just as bad if what somebody who works below him does, because they'll be operating on his orders, and he doesn't have a manifesto yet, which means that it'll just be essentially as if Nigel Farage was in the Cabinet Office. Why I say Cabinet Office is because if Boris Johnson is even like 5 seats short of a majority, there is no way he's not forming an electoral pact with Nigel Farage and the Brexit Party. I mean, today you heard a member of the Conservative Party on Andrew Marr, who was asked about 7 times, can you rule out no deal? And he kept saying, well, we have a deal. No, can you rule out no deal? No, we have a deal.
But isn't that, forgive me, not that I would pass judgment on Andrew Marr, but isn't that a bit of a silly question? Because it's not in anybody's power to rule out no deal. If we can't get a free trade agreement done, then we're either going to have to ask for endless extensions or come out on no deal.
Well, he was referring to a no deal immediately, as in the idea of, basically, if the Tories get into power with the majority, they'll pass their deal, we'll leave on their terms. Yes, that has the risk of a no deal for England, Scotland and Wales at the end of next year, but at least for the first few months, we're more or less safe from that. However, if the Tories don't have a majority and they need the support of the Brexit Party to get that majority, the fact that a representative of the Conservative Party refused to rule out no deal, and the fact that the Brexit Party are demanding that the Tory Party drop their deal in favour of a no deal Brexit, means that there is a very real possibility that if the Tories get into power and they need the Brexit Party to make up the numbers, they go for no deal simply to get them on board.
In broad terms of the general election, with the Brexit Party taking that basically extreme view, going after the no deal vote, saying, look, you know, if you're a true Brexiter and a true leaver, no deal Brexit is the only true Brexit. What do you think that does to Boris Johnson's chances of getting that majority? Do you think it makes, because Olivia, who was on the show, I think made a very astute observation, which is that people who would like to get Brexit done or who would like to see a deal go through would now find it easier to vote for this deal, for Boris Johnson's deal, just because of Nigel Farage being against it. There are certain sensible, sensitive, intelligent Leave voters out there who want to leave, but they would never want to associate themselves with someone like Nigel Farage. So he's made their job a lot easier to support Boris Johnson, because had Nigel Farage come out and gone, great, we love Boris, we love this deal, we're going to throw our weight behind, but we're going to help him in those Labour Leave seats. We're, you know, even if he doesn't want to form an alliance, we're going to help Boris Johnson because we think this deal is the way out. That hasn't happened.
Well, yeah, I mean, that... Yes, there will be some especially traditional Tory voters who like the idea of economic prudence, and i.e. the traditional Conservative values, who are appalled by the concept of Nigel Farage dictating the terms of our country's future, and will be more turned on by Boris Johnson's Brexit deal because Nigel Farage is against it. But that still leaves a significant number of Brexit voters who oppose this Brexit. And so by Nigel Farage championing them, because I mean we've had about a year, or maybe a year and a half, of no deal Brexit becoming almost a virility symbol. Like, you're not a true Brit unless you think we can completely cut ties with the EU and go on our own.
You're
and
a plastic Brexiter if you support the deal. Yeah.
Exactly. And so you've got a significant part of the Brexit voting population who do not accept Boris Johnson's deal, who think no deal is the only version of Brexit that's acceptable. And by Nigel Farage criticising Boris Johnson's Brexit deal, he helps us in 2 ways. One, he exposes the flaws in Boris Johnson's Brexit deal, namely the fact that the future declaration will involve following the rules of the EU but with no say, the fact that it doesn't get Brexit done, it just means more negotiations.
But if a Conservative minister was in this room right now, they'd say that the political declaration is not legally binding. They don't have to follow in close alignment in the regulations. So that still leaves that door open.
It leaves that door open, but Nigel Farage will be playing on the fact that, look, this is what the Tories plan to do. They're the party that will try and do what they think will protect business, and that does involve a degree of regulatory alignment to protect supply chains, especially in the manufacturing sector. And so he'll be criticising that deal, and By the very act of him criticising it, he'll be exposing the fundamental flaw in the Brexit debate, which is that Brexit voters want fundamentally incompatible things. If the 52% are split between those who don't accept no deal and don't accept Boris Johnson's deal, then the 52% as a concept is utterly fictional, because you mathematically can't please them all, whereas the 48% wanted one specific thing.
Mm-hmm. I find it difficult to disagree with that point. I think that the idea that 17.4 million people voted for one thing has now been completely torpedoed when you have Nigel Farage on one side and Boris Johnson on the other, both saying that their version of Brexit is the true Brexit.
Yeah, I mean, they almost tipped their hand from the start. We should have seen this coming when there were 2 Leave campaigns in 2016.
Okay, but it's all very well us saying that there is a problem on the Leave side, but it's not as if the Remain side are all happy bedfellows together. Yep. We have Jo Swinson, who keeps repeating the statement that she thinks Jeremy Corbyn is unfit to be Prime Minister. You have the Labour Party refusing to do any sort of non-aggression deals in seats. This remains to be seen. We still have 6 weeks to go, so these might change. And you seem to have an unsettled house from the Remain side. How much of that is a concern to you? Surely you want everybody on the Remain side to be singing from the same hymn sheet.
100%. I mean,
but are you concerned that they're not?
Yeah, I am, because essentially one of the reasons why people voted for Brexit in 2016 was that feeling that the political class, those who work in politics, are more obsessed with their own little political games than what's in the best interest of the country. And if the people on the Remain side aren't able to put their differences aside in the best interests of the country, when we know that we're already fighting an uphill battle, because in 2017 the majority voted for parties that ruled out no deal, yet because of our broken electoral system, the majority of seats went to parties that were in favour of no deal. We know we're fighting an uphill battle, so they have to work together. If they don't and prefer their own political games, they're not changed, they're more of the same. So I am calling on Jeremy Corbyn, on Jo Swinson, please, in the best interests of the country, work together, defeat Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage. That is necessary.
Do you think there's any chance that they will listen to your calls?
Well, it depends on whether or not their values are true. I mean, they know that if they compete against each other in marginal seats, they just give seats to the Tories. I mean, for example, Theresa Villiers' seat is one where the Remain vote was extremely strong in 2016, and the majority in 2017 voted for parties that were against Brexit, or at least against a hard Brexit. Yet she's the person who speaks for that constituency. If you have the parties that are in favour of stopping this mess competing against each other, it only weakens us.
A good example, I think, as well, is Zach Goldsmith's seat in Richmond. The Liberal Democrats, it's been going back and forth between the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives. I mean, if Labour stand a solid candidate there, all they're going to do is give Zach Goldsmith his seat back.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same thing in Stroud, in Cheltenham, in Stroud,
Cambridge.
A couple of Lib Dem seats going to the Labour candidate in Stroud would have meant a Labour candidate instead of a Tory. A couple of Labour candidates going to the Lib Dems in Cheltenham would have meant a Lib Dem candidate rather than a Tory. We have to vote tactically, otherwise you're essentially voting for Nigel Farage's Brexit Party.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. Remember, you can get in touch with the show. 0344 499 1000 is the number you need. You can speak directly to me and Femi. You can tweet us here at Talk Radio. You can text us, text the word talk followed by your message to 87222. And you can watch us live on YouTube and on our Facebook page. We'll be straight back after this quick break.
This is Talk Radio. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio with The Times and The Sunday Times. Know your times.
It's hard to find a children's gift which doesn't have a short shelf life. They'll eat all the chocolates in 5 minutes, finish their video games by the end of the week, and grow out of their trainers before you know it. So instead of buying them something just for Christmas, buy them something that's for life. Premium bonds from NS&I. Every month they'll have the chance to win cash prizes. And now you can buy premium bonds for any child. Start their savings journey from just £25. Search Gift Premium Bonds to find out more.
You're in leakage, you're in leakage. You're in leakage, you're in leakage. You're in leakage.
Urine leakage, urine leak.
Henna, men.
K.
Pants and pads.
Urine.
Discreet.
Leak.
Masculine.
Urine.
Secure absorption zone. Buy online or in shops.
Urine.
Henna, men. Keep control.
Urine?
No.
Hey, Philip Schofield here. WeBuyAnyCar.com reckon you could find out what your car's worth in under 60 seconds. I know, I didn't believe it myself, so I timed it. And it's true. It actually took me only 53 seconds. Not that it's a race. So if you want to find out how much your car's worth, or just want to beat my time, enter your reg number now at WeBuyAnyCar.com. Think I might give it another go. 49. Get in.
Admin fee may apply. For more information, see WeBuyAnyCar.com/info.
Order! Point of order! Order!
The negotiating, the debating, the infighting. With analysis and opinion from the best connected journalists in Westminster, The Times and the Sunday Times can help you make sense of the political jungle. Visit thetimes.co.uk or pick up your copy today.
Talk Radio Traffic and Travel.
The M23 is still closed in Surrey between the M25 and the A23 at Hooley. That's following a serious accident. There are long delays on the M23 northbound, and there's also a delay on the M25 clockwise going from Junction 6. In Berkshire on the M4 eastbound between Junction 5 to the Langley and Junction 4B for the M25, there's an accident. It's on the hard shoulder now, but it has left some delays. And in Gloucestershire on the M5 northbound between Junction 14 for Thornbury and 13 for Strood, a lorry's having a tyre change, so lane's closed. I'm Michael Page.
Welcome back, Mr. Jones. How was your Touareg 48-hour test drive? Mr. Jones, I said, how was the test drive?
Fantastic, thank you.
What did you make of the Touareg's touchscreen Innovision cockpit?
Brilliant.
And the climate control massage seats?
Oh, marvellous.
How about the night vision camera?
Absolutely exceptional.
That's great. So, are you going to unlock the door?
No.
The Volkswagen Touareg 48-hour test drive. The hardest part will be giving it back.
Come on, Mr. Jones, open up.
Can't hear you.
Participating retailers only, subject to status, vehicle availability and retailer T&Cs. And 17th of December 2019.
Across the UK, online and on DAB Digital Radio. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the show with me, Alexis Conran, here on Talk Radio. With me, I have Femi Oluwole from Our Future, Our Choice. You can get in touch with the show, 0344 499 1000 is the number you need. You can tweet us at Talk Radio. And watch us live on YouTube and Facebook. Norfolk on YouTube says, 8 years of Tory cuts and Labour are polling last. How? Femi, I've learnt a lesson about polling, which is take it with a large bucket, truck full of salt, and that polling is only a snapshot of that very moment. A bit like the referendum. But it is a genuine concern for those on the Remain side or on the Labour side that after 9 years of Conservative austerity, governments that have been found for the first time in contempt of Parliament, that was under Theresa May, governments who were found to mislead the Queen, that was Boris Johnson prorogation, various scandals, and I don't mean sort of tittle-tattle scandals, but Chris Grayling paying for ferry companies that didn't have ferries, all that money that has been wasted, various U-turns. I mean, there's a lot to unpick there. And yet, the Conservatives are still anywhere between 8 and 16 points ahead. How is this possible?
It's because of the infighting on the left. It is essentially down to that. Well, it's because, you've got Labour took a long time coming into its current position on Brexit. And so Remainers within Labour, who made up 71% of their 2017 voters, weren't particularly happy with that. They're in as far as we need them to be now, because they're saying that if you vote us into power, we will have a referendum on a deal versus staying in the EU, and we have a chance of stopping Brexit.
The problem, though, is I mean, you know, forgive me, you've just explained it very simply, but it isn't really that. The full promise is vote for us.
We'll negotiate
a new deal within 6 months, which, let's set the questionability of that time that they've set of 6 months. And then we are going to put that deal that we've just negotiated versus Remain on a second referendum, but we won't tell you just now which way we will campaign. I mean, that is not I would not want to be a Labour candidate knocking on a door and someone going, "What's your view on Brexit?" and have to explain that.
Well, okay, let's look at one step by step. The idea of negotiating a new deal, and I should start by saying I'm not here as Labour spokesperson. I'm just trying to explain what they're doing. Negotiating a new deal. What the sort of deal that Jeremy Corbyn wants is a deal that keeps us in the single market, so the regulations of the EU, and also the customs union, so the trade policy of the EU. Now, that is something the EU would pretty much happily give us. There may be some pushback from Norway because it means we'd be treading on the toes of the EEA, but more or less the EU pretty much was saying that's one of the options that you had. It's one of the options they offered us from the start. So getting that would be quite quick. They may not be able to get that if they have to go into coalition with the Lib Dems, for example, because they might say, we don't want to negotiate, we just want to go for a referendum immediately, and that would be Boris Johnson's deal. But ultimately, one of the things that people need to really get their head around is, yes, the process you just described there is long. It's negotiating a new deal, it's putting that deal to the people, it's having that referendum and the campaigns associated. But we are still talking about a matter of months. If any version of Brexit goes through, it's years. So Boris Johnson, when he says "get Brexit done," it's simply not true.
But let's go back to that question there about how are Labour still so behind in the polls. Is it to do with Jeremy Corbyn himself? He's spectacularly unpopular. There's the Sunday Mail today have got some figures from polling. I mean, he's ridiculously behind Boris Johnson. Is it a question of the leader? And we will start talking, of course, for the oncoming election, the fact that when you tick that box, are you ticking for your MP or are you ticking because you know who you're going to send to number 10? And a lot of people have problems when they have this image of sending Jeremy Corbyn into number 10. They might love their local constituency MP, but they have issues with Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah, I don't deny that there are issues in the public in terms of the views of Jeremy Corbyn. Some issues founded. But ultimately, this isn't about... I mean, I'm not sat here as a Corbynite. I'm not sat here as somebody who massively supports...
No, but he's the only person who is offering you the route to what you've been campaigning for 3 years, which is a second referendum. The Lib Dems are not offering you that because their promise is if we win a majority, we revoke.
Yeah, so the Lib Dems specifically, they're saying if we win a majority, we revoke. However, given, let's say they don't win a majority... they will be in coalition with somebody else, and in that coalition they will definitely put for a referendum because it will be the only way to stop Brexit.
How does the revocation sit with you?
The idea of revocation only works if they get a majority of votes as well as a majority of seats. So, for example, this argument that you keep hearing of how can they call themselves Liberal Democrats if they're willing to go against democracy and simply revoke Brexit? Sorry. If the majority vote for a party that is promising to stop Brexit, are you seriously telling me it would be undemocratic for that party to stop Brexit? I mean, come on.
Well, I think a lot of people will see it as that because there we come back to the muddled issue of is this general election purely about Brexit or is this general election about schools, hospitals, policing, education?
Yeah, it's ironic that we hear that argument from the same people who said we shouldn't have a referendum, which would have been a simple choice about Brexit. They forced us into this general election, which is by definition general, and they're complaining that people are now being given a choice to stop Brexit. I mean, it is hypocrisy of the highest order.
When you came into the studio and being on the sort of just out of your bed rest for your sickness, and thank you again for coming in, I asked you if you're going to keep going. Are you going to keep going until the 12th of December? And what happens after that?
Yeah, so I guess my message to everybody is by the 12th of December, we will know whether or not there's going to be a referendum or whether or not we're going to be stuck in this Brexit process for the next 7, 10, 12 years. So you need to recognise that you need to do absolutely everything in your power, because I will be, to make sure that we get Boris Johnson out of power and make sure that we get people in power that are going to give us the future that we need, because parties are going to give different manifestos, they're going to give promises about the NHS, policing, etc. But none of that will happen if we're spending the next 7 years negotiating over Brexit, negotiating with the EU and Trump. How much have we seen the government deal with the NHS, policing, housing, regional inequality, climate change over the last 3 years? Nothing. They've been focused on Brexit. If we're having to spend the next 7 years negotiating with the EU and Trump, do you seriously think they'll be dealing with those issues?
Okay, and let me transform you to your transport you to your utopia, which is a second referendum, right? It's Remain versus Boris's deal, someone else's deal. Remain wins, right? Do you really think it's all over? Do you think those 17.4 million people, or do you think maybe they're not 17.4 million anymore, maybe they're less, maybe there's more, whoever, but do you think that this discussion ends there? It all finishes?
The discussion doesn't end. But given that you'll have, especially within this referendum, within this general election now, Nigel Farage opposing Boris Johnson's version of Brexit, will be very, very clear at that point that there was never a majority for any specific version of Brexit.
Sure. But the people who wanted to leave, whether it was on no deal, whether it was on Boris's deal, whether it was on Theresa May's deal, whether it was a Norway deal, all those versions. They're not just going to sit there quietly and go, oh, okay, well, I guess we'll just have to forget about it now.
And neither should they. If they can come up with a specific version of Brexit, a specific new relationship with the EU that they believe has popular support, then we should absolutely continue that discussion. If they think there's a better relationship than membership, absolutely. But I know that the country as a whole wants to move on. Now, the problems led to Brexit primarily around regional inequality, that we have a country that works for London and just leaves vast areas of the country completely behind. That only gets fixed if we are all focused on fixing it. If the government's top priority is investing in Hull, Swansea, Redcar, Newry, Motherwell, but it's not doing that. And I've spoken to Brexit voters. I remember one Brexit voter in Wolverhampton who told me if we were all on £1,000 a week, none of us would care. If you fix the problems that led people to made people so angry that they voted for Brexit in 2016, we can finally come together.
Okay, so going forward, we're going to be in purdah period, and obviously my hands as a broadcaster are going to be a little bit further tied. But going forward in these election campaign weeks, your advice to those who see your point of view, who want a second referendum, is what exactly? Because we've heard a lot about tactical voting. A lot of people have said, well, maybe tactical voting is all right, but actually what happens when people enter the booth, they forget about tactical voting and they'll go with their instinct, or they'll go with their traditional votes. What needs to be done in your point of view to secure that second referendum?
My message to young people especially is if you're registered to vote, I need you to find everybody in your friendship group who isn't registered to vote and get them registered. That is gov.uk/register-2-vote. Get them registered, because earlier this week, Tobias Elwood, a former Minister of Government, current Tory party member, he said on Sky News that, yes, the discussion about letting 16-year-olds vote is one that we should have at some point, but given that it would probably favour a particular party, now is not the time to do it. That is a member of the ruling party saying that they specifically don't want young people to vote because they would vote for parties that would keep us in the European Union. They know that our generation doesn't want us to leave, yet they're specifically silencing us. So you need to make sure that every young person you know is registered to vote as a matter of priority.
And looking forward to post the election, say, because a lot of talk has happened, if there's a hung parliament, maybe Jeremy Corbyn is the largest party. The obvious choices for him is to do a deal with the SNP. The SNP will want something in return, and that is a referendum on an independent Scotland. Do you worry that what you're advocating, i.e., a vote to get the Tories out, put Jeremy Corbyn in number 10, realistically he stands a better chance than Joe Swinson does or anybody else. Do you worry that the advice that you're giving may lead to a Scottish referendum, and that may lead to Scotland leaving the Union?
I believe that the main justification for having another referendum on Scottish independence is the fact that they were sold a pup. In 2014, David Cameron said, don't vote to leave the UK, otherwise you'll be dragged out of the EU. And then 2 years later, we dragged them out of the EU. And that creates a legitimate reason to ask that question again because the circumstances have changed. However, if Jeremy Corbyn is in office, if Jeremy Swinson is in office, if there's a Remain coalition in office, then there is a high likelihood, especially as even Nigel Farage says that a choice between Boris Johnson's deal and staying in the EU would result in Remain every single time, that the motivation for having another Scottish referendum would essentially disappear because we'd stay in the EU. So while, yes, there is a risk, I believe that the people of Scotland, on the whole, wanted to stay in a UK that was in the EU. And I think that even if there were to be a second Scottish referendum, as long as we're still staying in the EU, the Union of the United Kingdom would stay together.
Mm. I've got to ask you one more question that's come up on our social media feeds. Plenty of people from the Leave side will say, look, OK, if you want to have a second referendum, that's fine. But on that second referendum, you can't have the option to remain because that's already been decided. That was decided back in 2016. So if we're going to have a second referendum, it should be between some sort of deal, perhaps a soft Brexit deal, and a hard Brexit deal, because the question in their minds has been asked and has been answered. People have said we want to leave. The second referendum should be on what terms we leave.
Okay, this is a question of basic math. We have seen that the people behind Nigel Farage do not accept Boris Johnson's deal. And we've also seen that there are Brexit voters who oppose no deal. So essentially, if we were to have a referendum between those two options, we're saying, let's find out what a majority of 52% actually want. Because the 48%, they don't want to leave. Let's forget. So forget those. They're not getting their first choice. So we're looking at a majority of 52%, which means that let's say even 90% of Brexit voters want the deal or want no deal. That's still barely 45% or so. So you're going to end up doing something that 45 max wants at the expense of what 48% wants. It is mathematically absurd.
OK, but it's also mathematically absurd that for every general election, you have a prime minister that only 35% of the country has voted for. That's also mathematically absurd. So I don't quite get your argument there, Femi.
Well, for starters, we have a horrendous first-past-the-post system, which means that our current voting system is broken. I mean, the majority literally voted against the Conservative Party in 2016, yet they're the ones running the show. But
that happens in every general election.
Yeah, but it means that...
But you see the point.
But it's a flop.
But also, when you framed your argument against that the referendum on the terms of when we leave, Remain voters will also vote in that referendum. And they will have to choose between, OK, I have to accept the fact that we're going to leave because that was the result of the first referendum. How would I like to see us leave? Well, maybe the majority of Remainers will go towards a soft Brexit.
The problem is phrasing it as leave and remain. If we leave on no deal, what that means in terms of international law is there is no treaty between the UK and the rest of the EU. If we leave with Boris Johnson's deal, there is a treaty that is fundamentally different to the treaty that we currently have, which are the EU treaties. Those are three completely different things. Now, if 16 million people want the current treaties, if whatever million want not to have a treaty, whatever million want to have Boris Johnson's treaty, then the most popular specific international relationship between the UK and the EU is membership of the EU. And as for the idea of, well, it's already been decided, we've eliminated that, that argument is literally the same as saying, in 2010, the majority voted against Labour. Therefore, how dare you put Labour on the ballot paper again? We've already decided that we want a Tory future. Now we should decide what sort of Tory future we want. It is the exact same thing. If you say that a democracy can't change its mind, especially when you're forgetting what 48% of voters want, that is fundamentally undemocratic.
Femi, as always, thank you for giving us your time.
My pleasure.
Always a pleasure to see you. Femi Oluwole there, campaigner for Our Future, Our Choice. Take care of yourself, will you?
I will try.
OK, we'll be straight back after this break with plenty of your calls, texts and tweets.
On DAB, online and on your mobile. Countdown to the election on Talk Radio. Up-to-the-minute breaking news and instant reaction on the radio station that's got everyone talking. Countdown to the general election on Talk Radio.
The late night alternative with Ian Lee. Unconventional after-hours radio that you won't hear anywhere else. When the sun goes down, he comes alive with callers from the other side.
The ones who want to air their views on the stuff that never makes the news.
Do fish bleed? Do pigeons have homes? Were the monkeys better than the Rolling Stones?
Would you ever use a haunted loo?
What made Ian turn the air so blue?
How do you sleep at night, you thieving little...
Listen each weeknight from 10 and you'll soon find out you're just like that.
Something extraordinary is happening on your radio. Make sure you don't miss the show that everyone else is talking about.
The Late Night Alternative with Ian Lee. Weeknights from 10 on Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online and on DAB.
This is Talk Radio. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio. With the Times and the Sunday Times. Know your times.
Trick or treat!
Oh, sorry, this is a Vauxhall Network Q retailer.
But your sign says no tricks, just treats.
Well, yeah. Treats like a £1,000 deposit contribution on an approved used SUV at 9.9% APR representative.
I'm telling my mum.
Well, get her to hurry. Offer ends on November the 4th. And don't forget our 1-year warranty and roadside assist. No tricks, just treats. Search Network Q. Because buying a used car shouldn't be scary. Personal contract purchase, subject to status, T's and C's apply. 18 plus only, Vauxhall Finance.
Everyone knows it pays to shop around to save money on your energy deal. But who has the time? If only there was a website that did all the hard work for you, year after year. Well, there is. It's called switchcraft.co.uk. They find you better energy deals and automatically switch you every time your plan ends, helping customers save an average of £219 a year on energy bills. Best of all, it's totally free. Switchcraft.co.uk. The one-stop, no-hassle route to cheaper energy. Start saving now at switchcraft.co.uk/radio. Switching made smarter.
Today, it's Crystal Palace v Leicester and Everton v Tottenham in a cracking double-header. And with no TV, you can watch both games live for a one-off payment of just $9.99. Hold on, they're checking with VAR.
That's confirmed, it's $9.99.
Unbelievable stuff. So, to only pay for the games that matter to you, grab a Now TV Sky Sports Day Pass. Search Now TV Sports. 18 plus, content streamed via internet, full terms apply.
Talk Radio, traffic and travel.
The M23 remains closed in Surrey between the M25 and the A23 at Utley. It's because of a serious accident. We got delays on the northbound side of the M23 approaching the closure and on the clockwise side of the M25 from Godstone at Junction 6. In the West Midlands on the M42 northbound between Junction 6 for Birmingham Airport and the M42 at Junction 8 it's delayed because of an earlier accident, and in Staffordshire on the M6 northbound, 2 lanes remain closed for emergency repairs between Junction 14 for Stafford North and Junction 15 for Stoke-on-Trent. I'm Michael Payne.
Welcome back, Mr. Jones. How was your Touareg 48-hour test drive? Mr. Jones, I said, how was the test drive?
Fantastic, thank you.
What did you make of the Touareg's touchscreen Innovision cockpit?
Brilliant.
And the climate control massage seats?
Oh, marvellous.
How about the night vision camera?
Absolutely exceptional.
That's great. So, are you going to unlock the door?
No.
The Volkswagen Touareg 48-hour test drive. The hardest part will be giving it back.
Come on, Mr. Jones, open up.
Can't hear you.
Participating retailers only, subject to status, vehicle availability and retailer T&Cs. And 17th of December 2019.
Across the UK, online and on DAB.
The Matthew Wright Show. Tomorrow afternoon from 1 on Talk Radio.
I'm Matthew Wright. Join me on Talk Radio. I'll be shaking up your afternoons with 3 hours of original current affairs conversation, unfiltered comment and irreverent opinion.
Putting the world to rights. The Matthew Wright Show. Tomorrow afternoon from 1.
Always look on the right side of life.
On Talk Radio. Across the UK, online and on DAB Digital Radio. The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the show with me, Alexis Conran, here on Talk Radio with the Times. Know your times. And remember, Talk Radio is your election station. Rigsby on Twitter says, I'm guessing the guy interviewing Femi is a Remainer. He's allowed Femi a political broadcast without challenge. Poor broadcasting. First of all, Femi's not a political party, Rigsby. And second of all, I did challenge Femi because there are certain things that I don't quite see the point of the second referendum, although that's a sort of one of the best of a bad bunch as it comes to options. But I did think that there is a valid logic for leavers who say, well, OK, let's have a second referendum, but why should Remain be on that ballot, seeing as Remain's been rejected back in 2016? And Femi's entitled to his views, which you just heard before the break. Anyway, thank you for your tweet. Paul has been watching us on YouTube in Leicester and has decided to call in. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Good afternoon. Yeah, I've not been watching YouTube. I get a tweet in. So.
Oh, you tweeted? Okay, fine. What would you like to say?
Just a few bullet points. Well, it is going to be a Brexit election, unfortunately, but I think it's a mixture of everything. We needed to get some tested feasibility on a lot of the MPs who have moved, who should have had by-elections at the start. They need to get clarity on that, the incoming incumbents. And I think a lot of it, if we eventually get to the election, and unfortunately, all I'm getting at the minute is not getting a lot of detail. John, that was on Andrew Marr show this morning. I thought it was going to be...
Boris Johnson was on with Sophie Ridge.
Yeah, I watched both, but Andrew, John Marr, he wants a more radical thing than we've ever seen before, a few weeks away. So I thought we were going to lock back pounds and pence and whatever. Kids gloves, Andrew Marr, kids gloves. No, hardly any mention about money, how you're going to fund it. It's something about climate change, kids gloves, where I thought we had a chance then to scrutinise him about stuff like this. Now they're going to bring it all out, but surely you're in the chair 6 weeks away. Didn't get anything on that. Found that a bit of an open goal really, but there you go. I did watch the Boris Johnson one on Sophie Ridge, but it needed to be done though, didn't it? It needed to be done because all what was going on, all this nastiness, whatever, in the House of Commons.
And you think this nastiness is going to go away during the period of a general election?
Yeah, it's gone. I think one of the main persons has gone away, and if you've seen it, the man himself, John Burko, he's a referee. People look at him as a referee in charge, very demeaning, nasty, all across really for years, and that's the man. That's your culprit.
Okay.
In a kind of a way, because he's a referee.
Okay.
He's being like that, but that's the point. But we're getting to the point now where it's going to be that people are going to be offended because one doesn't actually agree with them.
Okay.
Doesn't actually agree with them.
Okay, Paul, thank you for your call. I see your point about John Burko, but... and I've often felt that as much as I enjoyed John Burko's use of language and how firm and sometimes belittling he was to MPs, I do see your point that he may be added to that nastiness, but I don't think John Burko is responsible for the way public have reacted to MPs. I don't think John Burko is responsible for the abuse and death threats that MPs have received, and we're seeing so many female MPs stand down because of this. But I do take your point that if you are going to belittle an MP on the benches, as much as John Burko used to, then you are adding to that fuel within the House, but not outside of it. And I think we've got a bigger problem outside. This is down to anonymity on Twitter. I receive a lot of abuse, and so does everybody else who appears on any public forum, usually from people who hide behind an anonymous Twitter account. And I don't think John Burko's got much to do with that. But thank you for your call there. Nigel has called from Temple Fortune. Nigel, we've spoken before. Welcome back to the show. What would you like to say?
Well, good afternoon. It's a long time no speak, but thank you for welcoming me back. I want to say two things. First, just a quick line about MPs receiving threats. Mm-hmm. I think any person who receives threats, an MP or not, death threats, forms of threats of physical violence or intimidation, the police have a duty to investigate, because, of course, it's a criminal offence to threaten to kill someone. If the police aren't doing their job, we need to ask the police why they're not doing their job. The second point is, in relation to your guest a little while ago, I'm sorry to say he was rather boring, tedious and dull.
Hang on, which one? I've had three guests.
Oh, I'm sorry. The last guest, I think it was Femi, the gentleman.
Yes.
Look, I'm sorry to say, the same argument he spouts out, the same argument for every Remainer, which is the country's going to go to a hell on a handcart, the economy's going to crash, we should have a people's vote, should have a second referendum, everything's going to be terrible, people didn't know what they were voting for, they never had the facts. That is irrelevant. It was a simple question: in or out, stay or go.
Nigel, what does out mean? What does leave actually mean? And the reason I ask this is, if you're going to have a leave, famously Theresa May says leave means leave, just like Brexit means Brexit. But if you have Nigel Farage, one of the architects of Brexit, say that actually Boris Johnson's deal does not mean leave at all, and it's a Brexit betrayal. And then you've got Boris Johnson and Michael Gove on the other side, who headed up the Vote Leave campaign, saying this is what Brexit is. Then which one's right?
Well, okay. Well, let me just try and analyse what you've said. Leave means not being in control of the European member states. We're not having to pay them just short of £270 million after our rebate. It means being free to make our own laws, free to make our own judgment. At the moment, we either leave with or without a deal. And what's fascinating about Jeremy Corbyn, in 2019 alone, we're not even at the end of it yet, but he's finally agreed to it. He called for a general election 50 times.
Hang on. You've moved on to another subject, because you haven't answered my question on what leave means.
Well,
No. But if Boris Johnson was here, he would say that his deal delivers that. So what's your problem with his deal?
Well, I don't have a problem with his deal. You're suggesting
but Nigel Farage has a problem with his deal. So how come leave means what? Would you be prepared to accept that leave doesn't mean one thing?
No, what I would be prepared to accept is this: is that unfortunately there's never going to be a perfect deal at all, because there's always going to be somebody who says, I don't like clause this, or I don't like clause that. So we've really got a choice, haven't we? We either leave with no deal whatsoever, or we leave with a deal which is going to be, let's say, acceptable to the majority, because you're never going to find a deal which I think pleases everybody.
So you're talking about compromise?
But going back to my original question, or my original point, is that, look, my partner voted to remain, I voted to leave. We don't have fisticuffs over it. But the point is people generally who voted to remain keep spelling. It's like a game of roulette. Everyone's number comes up, but no one wins. It's the same points of view: economic crash, economic disaster, people's votes, second referendum. If you remember what Mark Carney said, the failed Canadian politician, now the leader of the Bank of England, he said that if we leave, or interest rates could go to 5%. Well, you know what? Mark Carney needs to look at the history book, because in 1989, I think it was.
Okay.
I remember specifically.
We can sit here and argue and say Project Fear didn't come to fruition, yes or no. Some people may say, well, it didn't come to fruition because A, we haven't actually left yet. A counter argument to that is people said even if the vote goes to leave, then bad things will happen. Others will tell you that necessary steps were taken to prevent those bad things. We could be here all day, but as a counter-argument to what you've just said about Femi, whose main arguing point for the last 3 years has been, if we leave, it's going to be bad for our country. Let's put it in very basic terms.
Okay.
I will also say to you that in the last 3 years, I have not heard a single voice from the Leave department tell me why I am going to be better off if we leave. No one has told me that. The only thing I'm being told is it's not going to be as bad as what people say it is. And I am not seeing countries begging at the door saying, oh, when can we set up office in the UK? Because Brexit's going to be so brilliant. We're all going to profit from it. We really want to come to do our business in the UK. I'm seeing exactly the opposite. So where are those arguments?
Hang on a second. Microsoft have just set up in the United Kingdom a second office, one in Oxford Circus. Apple are doing big here. They're all doing. Okay. Google are doing massive here.
Institute of Directors survey done a month ago. 29% have either moved or planning to move away. Only 9% of businesses are moving their operations back to the UK because of Brexit. That is not a great advert, Nigel.
But hang on a second, it's all speculative, are planning to. I remember 3 years ago, HSBC said they're going to move everything out of the United Kingdom. Have they gone yet?
Nigel, how am I going to benefit? Go on, how am I going to... Tell me how I'm going to be better off.
I'll tell you, I'll answer the question in a slightly roundabout way.
I'll let you off, go on.
Okay. No, I don't think anybody knows, whether it's from the Remain or the Leave camp, if it would be better or worse off. I will tell you one thing. In 2016 in this country, BMW sold 250,000 cars. I don't think they're going to renege on selling cars. I'll tell you another really...
Do you know how much of the percentage of their exports we are, Nigel, of the German car industry?
How many?
8%. Okay. They are not going to shift they're not going to compromise the single market and the customs union for 8%. It'll hurt them. I'm not saying it won't, but they're not going to come to our rescue for 8% of their exports. It's just not going to happen.
Let me ask you a question. Why do BMW and Mercedes-Benz manufacture a vast majority of their vehicles in the United States and then ship those vehicles back to Germany to be resold in Europe? They must be getting a hell of a deal there, mustn't they, to manufacture?
I don't have those figures in front of me. Yeah, they may be getting a hell of a deal, but I wouldn't know enough to comment. But Nigel, I always enjoy our chats, and I'm only letting you go because I want to get Harry on the line. Thanks for calling in. Nigel there from Temple Fortune. Harry is called from Portsmouth. Harry, welcome to the show. What would you like to say?
Well, thank you, Alexis. I think you're right to pick up Femi on the mathematics near the very end. He does it all the time. He says mathematically this, mathematically that, and what he's doing because he admits that we've got an absolutely terrible electoral system. He then exploits it to the 110%. You know, this is what they're doing. This is the politicians' game. They're not delivering policies. They're not showing how good they are. They're busy mithering away, trying to get a few percent here and a few percent there, highlighting how bad our system is. And, of course, Femi will exploit it, and people who agree with him will exploit that to the full. So you're right to pick him up on these mathematical things that he keeps going on about, because I've listened to him for a long time now.
Harry, in your view, from the big news that's happened today of Nigel Farage saying he's not going to stand as a candidate for the Brexit Party, do you think that makes the Brexit Party stronger, or do you think it weakens their case?
Well, what they do is the opposition there would concentrate on Farage. I saw it when he was down at Ramsgate, was it, back in 15? They threw the kitchen sink at him.
In Thanet,
and the same will happen with Swinson. Unless they do a deal up there, the SNP will want to oik Swinson out of that Glasgow seat, to make her look very embarrassed. I don't know what the dealings are, what's coming out in the back rooms. I've got no idea. But their obvious target, like Farage was a target, is to put the pressure on them, and then they may Swinson possibly could agree to extra conditions for the SNP to lay off of her seat.
And you are down in Portsmouth. Tell us what's happening.
Yeah.
What's your view on what's going to happen down there in Portsmouth?
Well, I'm going on what I'm hoping some sensible heads in Brexit Party and Farage, a combination. No point going full steam ahead on somebody, say, like Penny Mordaunt, who is a Leaver anyway. And then we've got, I think, Donna Jones. She's she's the councillor who's going to stand in the south, which went Labour the last time. There's no point knocking out too many votes, just for the sake of it. So I think they should stand in seats so they get a slot on the local radio, the slot on the regional TV.
Right.
But they shouldn't necessarily stand in every last seat. They've got to watch who they're knocking out.
Okay, Harry, thank you for your call. God knows what's going to happen. Another text here. Nobody warned us about military unification as per PESCO, which will take all our forces. I think there's a concern about the EU army. I thought we'd moved on from there. I mean, no one can force you to be in an army you don't want to be in. If we are still a full-fledged member of the EU, we can decide not to be part of that EU army. Why would you be afraid of an army that you were part of? I don't see people getting afraid of NATO and all those coalitions. It wouldn't be an EU army. But anyway, I know there's people going to be shouting at their radio going, Jean-Claude Juncker said it. But Jean-Claude Juncker may be wrong. Or actually it was Guy Verhofstadt who said it. But maybe he's wrong. Look, no one's saying the EU is a perfect institution. So let's not try and pick holes in that. But let's move past this sort of EU army. Turkey's going to join the EU. Article 24, all that nonsense. Let's try and move on based on fact. Now, I'm going to be doing the show again, of course, through the electoral campaign. It's going to be very different because we get under Purdah rules, and Purdah rules change broadcasting completely. But do join me again next week from 10 till 1 for Talk Politics here on Talk Radio. Remember, Talk Radio is your election station.
This is
Talk Radio.
The Alexis Conran Show on Talk Radio with The Times and The Sunday Times. Know your times.
Book your seat this November for the chance to win some amazing football prizes with Hyundai. Go to football.hyundai.co.uk and register to test drive a Kona, Kona Hybrid, Tucson or Santa Fe from Hyundai's range of SUVs, and you could win an unforgettable football experience, including a VIP trip to Madrid to watch Atletico take on Villarreal and tickets to top Chelsea games. Book your